A game of shadows. Tewell watched helplessly as his chess game inched towards a dead end. Unexpectedly, it wasn't the students who got distracted during the lecture. It was the lecturer himself. "Of course, it's still quite challenging for you at the moment," he said absent-mindedly, moving a piece without much thought. "So, you can focus on mastering the essential spells first and supplement with practical combat. There's still a year left," he added, glancing at Percy, who sat across from him, frowning deeply at the board. "Plenty of time to prepare." He offered a vague consolation, but his mind was elsewhere. A sudden twinge of awareness prickled at the edge of his consciousness. The sensory magic he had placed in the fourth-floor corridor had been triggered. For the first time since setting it up, someone had stepped into its range. Another curious student sneaking around after hours? Perhaps, but he didn't react outwardly. Instead, he continued playing, masking his thoughts behind the slow rhythm of the chess game. The unfair professor. Only Cedric and the others noticed the difference in how Tewell treated people. With Percy around, the professor was noticeably dismissive of their questions. "The answer is in the textbook. Make sure to read it. We covered this in a previous private lesson. Use your brain for once." Yet when Percy asked something, Tewell suddenly became the most accommodating professor imaginable. "If you're interested, I'll give you a training dummy in a week or so. Don't worry, you can use it for a month anyway." The favoritism was blatant. Exchanging glances, Cedric and the others silently came to a unanimous decision. They must improve their wizard chess skills to become the professor's favorite tools. The fourth floor, uninvited guests. By 9:55 p.m., Tewell wrapped up his game precisely on time. As Percy and the others left, he quietly slipped out, heading toward the fourth floor. Students hurried past as curfew approached, their robes fluttering. On the third-floor staircase, Filch loomed, his lantern swinging as his cat glared at any students lingering too long. The fourth floor, however, remained untouched. Any young wizard that got too close was quickly warned and pulled away by their peers. Tewell glanced at the door. There was another sensory spell placed on it, but it was crude, sloppily done, hastily arranged. With a flick of his wrist, he disabled it effortlessly. Inside, he could hear music, no significant magical fluctuations, which meant, unless the intruder was simply admiring the sleeping posture of the three-headed dog, they had to be standing still, waiting for something. So, with confidence, he pushed open the door. Sure enough, the figure inside stood completely still, staring at Fluffy in deep thought. "You finally came, Tewell." The figure turned, his face smug with satisfaction. "Quirrell, a game of deception." Seeing his illusion charm fade, Tewell appeared, his gaze scrutinizing Quirrell with thinly veiled curiosity. "How did you know it was me?" Quirrell scoffed. "Isn't it obvious? New professor. Too powerful for a newcomer." His expression darkened. "And you sent your students after me. Ah, so that's what this is about." Tewell felt exhausted just hearing the accusation. "If I told you there was truly an accident, would you believe me?" Quirrell's expression twisted with frustration. He clenched his teeth, but then suddenly smirked. "Never mind," he murmured. "Your identity is exposed now. We're on the same starting line." That actually surprised Tewell. It had been in his best interest to keep his cover for as long as possible. Yet, somehow, Quirrell had lured him here. Or rather, Voldemort had. "So hostile," Tewell muttered. "Why can't we be a bit friendlier? After all, we have the same goal." Quirrell's expression soured, but he didn't argue. He knew as well as Tewell did. They needed each other to deceive Dumbledore and get to the Sorcerer's Stone. "Since that's the case, my good friend," Quirrell said smoothly, "why don't you take me down there for a look?" Tewell grinned, absolutely delighted. With that, they descended into the underground chambers. For the third time, Tewell stood before the enchanted chessboard. The unwinnable game. Quirrell paused, then frowned. "Why aren't you moving forward?" Tewell leaned against the wall lazily. "To get through, you need to win this chess game." He sighed dramatically. "It's not as easy as it looks. I haven't been able to get past it myself." That was a lie. But even if he could, he wouldn't. He needed Quirrell alive. He needed him to keep Dumbledore distracted while he got the stone. Quirrell's expression twisted in anger, pacing restlessly. Tewell smirked. "Why don't you try it, then?" Quirrell scoffed, but then a voice echoed in his mind. "Go ahead and try." Quirrell stiffened. "But Lord Voldemort—" He hesitated. "I don't know how to play wizard chess." A pause. "Can you play?" There was silence. Then, "I can't either." Quirrell visibly flinched as Voldemort's voice roared in frustration. Tewell, who had been watching Quirrell mutter to himself like a crazy person, barely held back his laughter. Quirrell shrank back slightly, mumbling, "You don't know how, and yet you're sending me?" Tewell's amusement faded slightly. He didn't want Quirrell brute-forcing his way through, potentially alerting Dumbledore. "Forget it," he sighed. "Unless you can somehow get the chess moves prepared by Professor McGonagall, you'll just have to figure out how to win." Quirrell scowled. He tried. He failed. The Dark Lord's concern. Back in his office, Tewell toyed with the ring in his pocket. It didn't take long before Voldemort's voice spoke again, through the Horcrux. "Is that really my essence?" "Quite disappointing," Voldemort sneered. Tewell grinned and held up the ring. "Speaking of which, can you two sense each other?" Voldemort scoffed. "Why don't you just remove the shielding spell and find out?" Tewell raised an eyebrow. "So there's a connection." A pause. Voldemort groaned. "I should have known better than to split my soul. I swear my IQ has dropped." Tewell hummed, thinking, "You feel anything from a child?" The Horcrux stilled. "What? A child?" Voldemort's voice sharpened. "You're telling me my soul is inside a child? Does that mean I can be resurrected?" Tewell smirked, but he didn't answer. Instead, he slipped the ring back into his pocket. "Hey, Hey, don't just go silent, Tewell. Tell me." The voice cut off. Tewell exhaled and stretched. "Good night." And with that, he left Voldemort to scream into the void. The art of levitation and suppression. On the afternoon of Halloween Eve, Tewell hummed a cheerful tune as he made his way toward the classroom. His mood was exceptionally good. The previous night, he had obliterated Percy in wizard chess, not just once, but all night long. As a reward for his glorious victories, the training dummies were postponed for an entire month, allowing them to keep practicing. Now, back to business. A test before the lesson. It was customary to start class with a test paper, a routine his students had grown accustomed to. By now, the first years had absorbed enough knowledge to begin matching the rhythm of the second and third years, reinforcing their understanding before diving into new material. 30 minutes later, Tewell waved his wand, and the test papers gathered themselves into a neat stack. "I heard something interesting while I was in the hall at noon," he remarked casually. "You all started practicing the levitation charm in this morning's charms class, didn't you?" The students immediately perked up, their excitement palpable. After all, this was only the second formal spell they had learned, the first being Lumos. With a flick of his wrist, 40 sheets of parchment crumpled themselves up and floated in front of each student. "Well," he continued, "first, I need to assess your proficiency with the levitation charm. See the parchment in front of you?" He gestured at the floating bundles. "If you can levitate a feather, then you can levitate this. Don't be discouraged. This is a necessary step before we move on to the next phase." Then his lips curled slightly. "I assume you all still remember the duel from over a month ago?" A wave of excitement rippled through the room. How could they forget? They had no idea what had happened for most of it. The duel had been so fast that only a handful of them even caught the main movements. Still, the spectacular moments remained burned into their minds. Unexpected transfigurations. Disarming spells taking the form of small birds. Golden armor spells gleaming in the torchlight. And most importantly, none of those spells were impossibly complex. If they could learn the advanced applications the professor had demonstrated, then they too could wield such magic. Their eyes shone with anticipation. But a minute later, their enthusiasm was shattered. The first setback. Except for a handful of students, no one successfully levitated their parchment. Tewell sighed dramatically, shaking his head. "This won't do," he lamented, his tone dripping with mock disappointment. "This isn't a charms class. We don't have time to practice basic spells here. If everyone hasn't mastered the levitation charm in the next 10 minutes, I'll have to postpone this lesson indefinitely. The classroom erupted into panic. Those who could cast the spell immediately began tutoring their struggling classmates, their voices rising with urgency. A chorus of Wingardium Leviosa filled the room, some spoken too loudly, others butchered beyond recognition. Then, a red light flashed. Tewell's wand flicked instantly, conjuring an iron armor spell around the rogue magic. Boom! The muffled explosion was swallowed by the protective shield, which then dissipated harmlessly into white light. Tewell turned his gaze toward the culprit. "Mr. Finnegan," he said, his voice carrying a mix of amusement and admiration, "you might want to relax a little more. Even a misfired spell from this one had serious force. If he specialized in destructive magic, he could very well become a human cannon." Ron's struggle and Hermione's frustration. Meanwhile, Ron was having zero success. His wand was unsuitable, and his morning argument with Hermione had only made things worse. The parchment in front of him didn't even twitch. Hermione, clearly agitated, puffed up in frustration. "It's Wingardium Leviosa, not Leviosa." Ron scowled. "I thought you weren't speaking to me." Hermione shot him a glare. "You think I want to talk to you?" Then she huffed. "If it wasn't for the professor's lesson, I wouldn't waste my time teaching you." Ron, begrudgingly, muttered, "Well, thank you then." Despite his annoyance, the last thing he wanted was to be the only student holding everyone back. With a deep breath, he lifted his wand. Wingardium Leviosa. The parchment slowly lifted into the air. Ron grinned in triumph, so much so that he nearly lost focus and dropped it again. Beyond levitation, the pressing charm. Tewell clapped his hands once. "Very good. The last student in the class has successfully mastered the levitation charm. Now, on to the highlight of today's lesson." The students held their breath, their eyes locked onto him. Tewell's wand flicked toward Ron's floating parchment. Wingardium Leviosa. The paper, which had been hovering, suddenly snapped downward, flattening itself tightly against the table as if pinned by an invisible force. The once crumpled parchment was now completely smooth, pressed flawlessly like an iron shirt. A hush fell over the room. Then, realization dawned. Some of the third years had heard a legend, a spell that could pin an opponent to the ground, rendering them completely immobile. Was this the spell they were about to learn? Their eager gazes burned with excitement. Tewell smirked. "Notice something? This isn't a new spell. The pressing charm is simply an application of the levitation charm, but in reverse. The incantation doesn't change. The wand movement is the same. The only difference is applying opposite force." A new wave of spellcasting attempts erupted. The students, eager to reverse their magic, attempted everything. Neville, in his usual bad luck, accidentally flipped himself upside down. Ron, in a brilliant idea, switched hands, resulting in no effect at all. Harry, learning from past failures, swung his wand downward too hard, smacking his own hand and drawing blood. Padma Patil, purely by fluke, succeeded once. "Congratulations, Miss Patil," Tewell praised. "However, I don't recommend that method unless you'd like a visit to Madame Pomfrey." The students chuckled, but some of them secretly twisted their wrists anyway. The rivalry continues. Ron, annoyed, turned to Hermione. "If you're so smart, why don't you show us how it's done?" Hermione, irritated, took up the challenge. A moment later, her parchment was pinned to the table, stubbornly refusing to move even when the wind blew. It wasn't perfect, but it was far better than Ron's. Ron huffed. "Try to completely flatten it, then." Hermione turned red. "Do you know how hard that is?" Tewell let them bicker, grinning as he watched his students struggle, learn, and compete. As the class ended, Hermione stormed out, missing Tewell's final words. "If the opportunity arises, I'll find you an opponent to experience real combat." For those who heard him, the thrill of the unknown sent a shiver of excitement down their spines.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Great Hall. The festival dinners have always been the most anticipated moments at Hogwarts, and the spooky Halloween is no exception. In tune with the holiday, the hall was carefully decorated. Professor McGonagall used transfiguration to extend numerous skeletons and ghosts along the walls. Professor Fawley released thousands of live bats, which flew around the walls and ceiling of the hall. Hagrid planted a batch of huge pumpkins, which were hollowed out and turned into pumpkin lanterns. If not for the huge candles inside, quite a few couples might have been tempted to sneak in for a pumpkin date. Professor Tewell also cast a small spell, causing many bizarre ghosts to float around the upper part of the hall. However, unlike the castle's ghosts, they resembled the sheet ghosts from Muggle films, complete with exaggerated facial expressions. Rather than being scary, they were cute and comical. These little ghosts contain rewards for you. Like in the orb game, they emit light and drop candies when hit. As soon as he finished speaking, colorful lights shot from the long table towards the ceiling. But a second later, the young wizards regretted it. When the ghosts were shattered, the candies fell like rain, pattering down on their heads. The young wizards instantly scrambled, using their backpacks to shield their heads, trembling like cute mice stalked by a cat. Except for Quirrell, the professors were all seated at the staff table, watching the chaos among the students with mischievous laughter. After a while, when all the ghosts were shattered, the candies stopped falling. Dumbledore stood up, unable to hold back his laughter. "Thank you, Professor Fawley, for bringing us this fun game before dinner. Now, let the dinner begin." Ron, who was bending down to pick up candies, only then noticed that the long table, previously covered in candies, was now piled with a variety of delicious dishes, as rich as the feast at the beginning of the term. Harry picked up a few candies and then stopped, choosing to start tasting them. This candy is actually soft, kind of like a fruit juice gummy. Ron stuffed his bag full of candies and patted it with a satisfied expression. "I'll keep these. This might be the only time I get a reward from Professor Fawley." Upon hearing this, the students around him who were unwrapping candies suddenly stopped, especially the older students, who began stuffing every visible candy into their bags, sparking quite a few disputes. In their imaginations, these were candies specially prepared by Professor Fawley for them. Rather than candies, I would actually prefer to have one of those little ghosts. They're so cute. A Slytherin senior held tightly to 2 candies, her reward for shattering that adorable little ghost. As the last of the candies were swept up, the students then turned their attention back to the feast. Now that annoying Granger not only misses out on the dinner, but also the candies, Ron said with schadenfreude. Hermione's roommate, Lavender Brown, frowned unhappily. "Don't say that about Hermione. She's still hiding in the girls' restroom, crying." Ron scratched his head, puzzled. "Crying? Why? Isn't it because of you guys always talking badly about her behind her back? She's hardly ever happy in the dormitory. But with her mouth, it's hard not to dislike her." Lavender was momentarily lost for words. "She's only trying to help us, just a bit too direct when she speaks." "You call that?" Bang! The great hall doors suddenly burst open with a noise loud enough to shake the ceiling, and Quirrell rushed forward, his scarf askew, nearly exposing the back of his head. He ran up to Dumbledore, adjusted his hat, and said in alarm, "There's a troll in the dungeon. I thought you should know." After speaking, he turned to give Tewell a look before collapsing with a creak. The great hall suddenly erupted into chaos. Harry and Ron exchanged glances, and before they could speak, someone voiced what they were all thinking. "Hermione is in the girls' bathroom in the basement. What about her?" Lavender cried out in terror, clawing at her face to the point of leaving red marks. Neither Ron nor Harry felt like joking. They were just as terrified. "Find a professor to help," Harry immediately suggested. "Professor Fawley is so capable. He can surely deal with the troll and save Hermione." Ron agreed at once, and they pushed their way through the panicked crowd to the staff table, where they found Fawley observing Quirrell. Panting, Harry urgently said, "Professor Fawley, it's Hermione. She's still in the basement. You have to save her, or she'll die. Don't worry, she'll be all right." Fawley approached Dumbledore, who was preparing to maintain order, and whispered, "Headmaster, I like to take the students to the basement and use the troll for a lesson. Dumbledore turned with a look of surprise. Dealing with a troll is easy, but can you guarantee the student's safety? Defense against the dark arts often taught students how to defend against dangerous creatures, but using a troll as a teaching aid was unheard of. I assure you, the students won't receive a scratch. On the contrary, this kind of formidable opponent is something they might not face even once in 7 years. After a moment's thought, Dumbledore asked, "So, you want to take the older students?" Fawley gestured towards Quirrell, who was still lying on the ground. "Let's not. Aren't the older students Quirrell's responsibility?" Dumbledore gave a resigned smile. "All right, I'll have Percy take the students below 3rd year to the basement." Satisfied, Fawley left to make preparations, ensuring at least to make the troll more manageable. Exiting the Great Hall, Fawley strode towards the basement. It was as gloomy and cold as it had been when he first arrived at Hogwarts. Thus, he set up several torches along the corridors and staircases leading to the basement, illuminating the path and dispelling the bone-chilling cold. Just as he finished setting up, he heard a terrified scream. The troll had made its entrance. Following the sound, he arrived at a girl's bathroom, but the door had been smashed, allowing the sound of incantations to flow unimpeded. Looking inside, a massive creature stood at the doorway, holding an equally massive wooden club. It towered at 12 feet tall, its skin gray and granite-like, but equally solid. However, in contrast, its head was disproportionately small, almost comical, making it seem unbalanced. Its flat, calloused feet seemed as though they were pressed down by some invisible force, making it difficult to lift them and take a step forward. Hermione was crouched in a corner, her hands tightly clutching her wand, continuously casting spells at the troll. Whether from fear or exhaustion from casting so many spells, her determined little face was pale, with sweat dripping down her forehead. Clap, 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 as Tewell applauded and stepped into the bathroom. "An excellent compression charm. Hard to believe you just learned it this afternoon." "Professor Fawley." Hermione's face brightened, and she inadvertently relaxed her grip on her wand, unable to maintain the compression charm any longer. Feeling the spell loosen, the troll stumbled slightly. The sudden ease, after having exerted so much force, left it momentarily disoriented. Scratching its small head in confusion, the troll's limited brain capacity could only focus on one thing: tearing apart the two people before it. Hermione's expression of joy vanished as she helplessly watched the troll raise its club to strike. "Professor." Before she could finish her plea, the troll froze, still mid-swing, its club hovering 10 feet above her head. "What's going on?" Tewell emerged from behind the troll, his nose now encased in a bubble. He had underestimated the stench that was 100 times worse than the bathrooms. "Nothing," Hermione said, shyly lowering her head. "How did you know I was here?" "Your two friends told me." Tewell then blew the troll aside and helped Hermione to her feet. The young witch was still shaky, barely able to stand. "What kind of friends are those?" she muttered under her breath, pouting slightly. "Don't be too harsh. Consider everyone who cares about you as a friend. That's how you make more friends." On their way out, Tewell repaired the bathroom door before finally letting go of Hermione, allowing her to join her classmates. The students had arrived, and a few anxious professors stood nearby. The hallway was bustling as Percy struggled to maintain order. Getting young wizards to listen was no easy task. Line up by house and year. 1st years at the front, 3rd years at the back. 2nd years? Of course, in the middle. Suddenly, everyone quieted down, expectantly looking behind him. Percy turned around. "Professor, I brought the students from all 4 houses, years 1 to 3. Tewell nodded in satisfaction. "Thank you very much, Percy. Please stay here a bit longer as a reward. At the end, you can practice some spells on the troll." Percy beamed with joy. "It's an honor to serve you." Tewell then turned to the young wizards and pointed towards the troll in the distance. "As you can see, here we have Mr. Troll. Tonight's extra lesson will be conducted by him." He arranged the troll's body in a spread eagle position so that the students could clearly see each part of its body. So first, what is a troll? Hermione shot her hand up, conspicuously tall among the third-year students. Hermione, Tewell tapped his wand. Speaking of which, Miss Granger just held off the troll for at least 20 minutes using a spell she learned this afternoon. Therefore, 10 points to Gryffindor. Blushing at becoming the center of attention, Hermione still mustered the courage to respond loudly. Trolls are magical creatures with remarkable strength but very low intelligence, which makes them extremely violent and prone to attack without provocation. Correct. Trolls are generally divided into 3 types: mountain trolls, forest trolls, and river trolls. The one we have here is a mountain troll. Professor, do all trolls smell this bad? Asked a first-year wizard. They stood closest to the troll, which also meant they were most affected by the smell. Besides the river monster, the taste of the other 2 isn't that great. After all, it's hard to get such creatures to understand the purpose of bathing. Considering the patience of the young wizards, Tewell added a bubble around the giant, locking in the smell. The students finally breathed a sigh of relief. You may have noticed that the giant has a very small head. The Muggle world likes to measure intelligence by brain size, and we in the wizarding world do too. But bear in mind, some magical creatures don't have large brains, but that doesn't mean they aren't intelligent. So, don't underestimate any magical creature. They might be smarter than you. Of course, this rule still applies to giants, so don't be fooled by their thick legs and long arms. The small head is actually their fatal weakness. This is also another principle of biology. No creature is perfect. Once you find their weakness, you can easily defeat them. Next, I will allow some of our excellent young wizards to come up and demonstrate how to deal with a giant. As soon as he finished speaking, the young wizards shouted excitedly, as if being loud could prove their excellence. Tewell pulled out a clinking pocket, the first batch of iron-armored spell badges he had ordered from Davies and Bance. Of course, what little magic is inside? Only he knows. Remember the orb game? I invite the top 10 from each year to come forward and receive a badge. Accompanied by sighs of disappointment from the other students, 30 top-ranking students walked out proudly, each taking a badge from the pocket. This is a protection badge that will guard you in times of danger, so try to pin it in the middle of your body, like around your waist. Mr. Malfoy, I know it looks handsome to wear it on your chest, but please follow the instructions. Malfoy's pale face turned slightly red as he hurriedly pinned the badge at the center of his abdomen. Harry chuckled at this scene. He had initially wanted to pin it on his chest too, but he gave up on the idea after seeing Malfoy do it. Very well, let's have the 10 first-year students come forward. Tewell lifted the freezing curse from the giant, but then cast a slowing spell, allowing it to break through the bubble in slow motion. The stench wafted over, making the 10 students tear up. The stench is also an attack method of the giant. And have you noticed its long arms? That's another not-so-subtle offensive method. Some unfortunate wizards have been flattened because they ignored the length of its arms. The students instinctively stepped back, even though they were still far away. So, the question arises as first years, how would you deal with this giant? All first-year students should think about this. It was Hermione who raised her hand first. Use a pressure spell to slow down the giant's movements. Yes, that's also the method Miss Granger just used against the giant. Its large feet make it particularly simple and effective to cast a pressure spell. What else? Remember, the giant's weakness is in its head. Trying to redeem his earlier image, Malfoy guessed loudly. Dazzle its eyes? Exactly right, Tewell exclaimed, snapping his fingers, causing the torches along the corridor to flicker. Malfoy felt happier than having dessert tonight, tilting his small head up proudly. But in the next second, his movements froze. Please be aware that our troll is heading towards you, so if you don't want to be flattened, please deal with it quickly. Tewell stepped aside, allowing the troll to lumber towards the 10 first-year students at a slow pace. Although it moved slowly, the tremors each of its footsteps sent through the ground were anything but slow, causing the students' hearts to quiver. Harry swallowed nervously and emitted the first burst of light. It hit the troll's head precisely, but only made it shake its head. Striking the head is useless. Although the troll's head is a weak point, the light you produce cannot harm it. Your target should be its eyes. However, inspired by Harry's attempt, the young wizards also shot out their spells in panic, but the troll slightly turned its head, and 3 red beams missed it by a whisker. The troll realized that these little ones were aiming for its head. A troll might be dumb, but it's not completely brainless. It won't just let you attack it. For the first-year students, this was their first combat training. Usually, they practiced on light balls that couldn't fight back, and now suddenly facing such a huge opponent, they panicked. However, being the best 10 students, they finally hit the troll's eyes halfway through its approach. The strong light and the impact made the troll cover its eyes and howl in pain, but the howling didn't last long before Tewell froze it again. Very good. Mr. Malfoy successfully hit the troll's eyes. 5 points to Slytherin. Following the example, Tewell then gave guidance to students of different years. The second-year students, knowing few spells, followed his instructions to slow down the troll and attack its brain and eyes, finally stunning it when it was just an arm's length away. The third-year students had a tougher time. They knew the most spells, but were closer to the troll. The stench alone made it unbearable for them, and had the troll not been slowed down by a slowness curse, they would have been utterly defeated. Even so, several students activated protective spells. This made everyone realize the extraordinary utility of the badge. Their wizard parents might not even be able to cast a complete iron armor charm. Their eyes heated up at the sight of these badges. Those who already owned one cherished it, afraid to even touch it too much. Very well, the disarming charm to knock the club away, then use the levitation charm and pressure charm to control the club and strike the troll's head. Well done. By the way, this solution was proposed by Ron, who was off the field. As the third-year students finally dealt with the troll, the class was almost over. Now, let us invite Mr. Percy Weasley from Gryffindor to demonstrate how to deal with a troll in its full state. Taking a deep breath, Percy slowly approached. Are you ready, Percy? Ready. Waking up the troll and removing the slowness spell from it, Tewell handed the stage over to Percy. Entering combat mode, Percy's gaze instantly became sharp. While still using obstruction spells, Percy targeted the troll's knee joints, not only effectively slowing its movements, but almost making its knees buckle. However, once the troll's movements were no longer slowed, it could block spells by swinging its arms. So Percy's attack was not as effective as those of the previous students. Realizing this, Percy stopped attacking the head and aimed at the troll's armpits. The clueless students laughed, thinking Percy was desperate. But Tewell's gaze sharpened, taking serious note of the prefect. The armpit is actually a common weak point in humanoid creatures, containing rich nerves and blood vessels that control the upper limbs, as well as important lymphatic tissue. And the only protection there is the tender skin. Attacking this area may not necessarily be very effective, but it's definitely more effective than attacking the troll's thick thighs and body muscles. Not many wizards know this, much like how not many are good at mathematics. It's a fact that has minimal influence on their magical practices. However, Tewell couldn't help but take a new respect for Percy, knowing how he used this knowledge to his advantage. Hogwarts really does have too many brilliant students. He made a mental note of Percy's name before he called a stop to the demonstration, to prevent him from actually breaking the troll's arm. All right, Mr. Weasley, if I let you continue, the scene would become something not suitable for the young wizards to witness. Percy might not have Tewell's keen observational skills, but he realized that his attack had already pushed the troll to its limits and promptly retracted his wand. The young wizards were somewhat disappointed. They might not understand the significance of targeting the armpit, but Percy's style of combat had a seamless grace that aligned with their own fantasies. They knew they couldn't learn from Professor Fawley in that style, but hopefully they could learn something from Percy's approach. All right, thank you very much, Percy, for providing us with the final point of today's lesson. The obstruction spell is most effective when targeting the joints, more so than any other part. That's the greatest efficiency of curse. You might also think about other spells and how they can be maximized in effectiveness. This isn't homework, just something to ponder. Well, that concludes our lesson for tonight. Please, everyone follow Mr. Weasley back to your dormitories in an orderly fashion. Professor, what about the troll? Asked a young wizard, still eager from the battle. Of course, we'll leave it for Professor Quirrell. He loves these smelly things, doesn't he? Tewell winked mischievously. The students burst into laughter as they left the dungeon. The professors gathered around then. That was a splendid lesson. It's hard to believe how young you are, yet you possess such extensive knowledge, Professor McGonagall remarked. She recalled her own younger days when, despite good grades, she lacked practical experience and often had to stick strictly to the textbook. Tewell's ability to teach according to each student's capabilities, something she only grasped after several years of teaching. You flatter me, Tewell said, casting a disdainful glance at the troll. Considering tonight's content was quite advanced, I'm not sure how much the students could actually learn. Typically, creatures like Troll-S are not taught until the 4th year, but an opportunity like this is hard to pass up. He didn't even know where one could find a troll, yet Quirrell managed to find one. Obviously, it shouldn't be wasted. Moreover, tonight's lesson ostensibly aimed at giving Quirrell time to attract some of the faculty's attention to let him work on some arrangements. But, in reality, it was meant to cast more suspicion on Quirrell. A troll breaking in right before Halloween is one thing, but a professor wakes up from a coma and then disappears? Who else if not him to suspect? After leaving the basement, Tewell did not go to check the situation on the 4th floor, but went straight back to his office, playing the role of an excellent, naive, pure-hearted professor. At this point, it was wise to stay far away from Quirrell. Then, this professor, seemingly as innocent as a white rabbit, pulled out a large parchment. All is permitted, and immediately, a large ink spot appeared on the parchment. From the center of the ink spot, black lines extended, continuously outlining all the buildings within the confines of Hogwarts Castle. However, this professor was not deeply familiar with the school, so the details were a bit rough, with some ink lines thick, some thin, and others tangled up in a mess. Nevertheless, these were all trivialities. The key thing was that 30 names appeared on the map, slowly moving around. The Weasley brothers were lingering in the kitchen, probably asking the house elves for food. Cedric was coincidentally on his way to the kitchen, and with a quick move, the 3 met in the kitchen. There was also the only name shimmering in gold, very conspicuous, Harry Potter. He was staying still in the common room, with Hermione Granger's name nearby. Tewell moved his wand over Harry's name, and with a flash of light, a clear voice came through. I was actually just a second away from hitting the troll before Malfoy did. I saw it. Hermione was clearly creating an opportunity for you, but Malfoy snatched it. This was Ron's voice. So, you guys aren't fighting anymore? If she wasn't so high and mighty, if he'd stopped bad-mouthing me. Hermione's voice then arose. After a bit of noisy quarreling, their relationship eventually returned to normal, discussing the evening's lesson like friends. After confirming that the badge and map were functioning correctly, Tewell put away the parchment. All is illusion. This was Tewell's version of the Marauder's map, only with a badge as a medium and a small modification mimicking the principle of the Mirror of Ariste, allowing him to hear voices from those wearing the badges. As for all is permitted and all is illusion, they were his favorite declarations, so he used them as spells for the map. The focus was now on Quirrell, just when, knock, knock, knock. A sudden knock on the door interrupted Tewell's thoughts. He reluctantly looked towards the door. It was Quirrell, whose stench could be smelled even through the door. It seemed deliberate that he would come here when Tewell was avoiding him. But no matter how reluctant, he had to open the door. If he kept knocking, it would attract unwanted attention. As the door opened a crack, Quirrell, more agile than usual, darted inside. Gently closing the door, Quirrell walked over with a smug step and sat down in front of Tewell. After putting away the parchment, Tewell looked emotionlessly at him, their expressions a stark contrast. It seems you had quite the haul tonight. Quirrell became even more smug, his legs shaking uncontrollably. That's for sure. I've already found out that only one person is watching that corridor. Guess who? Snape? ? Quirrell's shaking leg instantly stopped, and he asked in disbelief, How did you know? Tewell looked at Quirrell with a smirk. You tell me about your findings first. Recalling the events, Quirrell spoke hesitantly. After leading the students and professors away tonight, I sneaked up to the 4th floor, but I didn't go in. Instead, I opened the door and hid nearby, observing. Not long after, Snape hurriedly arrived and, seeing the door open, he rushed in. Quirrell chuckled maliciously, his expression twisted. He even got scratched by that 3-headed dog and limped out. So, you had me delay Snape tonight just to confirm this? Tewell shook his head disapprovingly. Isn't that enough? Quirrell stood up abruptly. Now that we've avoided Snape, we can go get the Philosopher's Stone. Tewell shook his head in frustration. You never think, do you? Besides Professor McGonagall, who assists Dumbledore in managing school affairs. It's Snape, and you're making such a fuss just to confirm the obvious. Kid, I'm really disappointed in you. Quirrell stammered, unable to form a coherent response. He felt foolish tonight, especially since Snape had tracked him earlier. Like using a cannon to kill a mosquito, it was overkill. Don't me. What's your next plan? Why should I tell you? Quirrell suddenly became defiant. Then don't come asking for my help next time. It's hard enough for me to prepare lessons for the students. Unlike you, playing like Lockhart. Quirrell panicked. His abilities and cunning couldn't match Tewell's, and without him, progress would surely slow down. Wait, I've been investigating Snape's setup. I can confirm it involves potions. Are you an idiot? Snape, the master of potions, needs you to confirm potion matters. Oh, well, okay, Quirrell chuckled awkwardly. You handle the chessboard, I'll handle the potions. As long as we overcome these 2 challenges, we can get the Philosopher's Stone. Tewell glanced meaningfully at Quirrell's somewhat pale face. It's me. Only I can get the Philosopher's Stone. Then I'll count on you to work harder. Remember, the Philosopher's Stone is our priority. Don't get distracted by trivial matters. Quirrell nodded indifferently and left the office cautiously. He won't live much longer, Quirrell said as soon as he left, the ring eager to speak. Half of his life force has been absorbed by the main body, much like your situation, or even worse. If things go as expected, he might only live for a few months, at most half a year. Tewell took out the ring and played with it in his hand. I remember absorbing life force to condense a semi-entity. So why does your main body keep attaching itself to Quirrell? Obviously to escape. The ring chuckled, and Tewell understood. In a soul state, only by making a Horcrux could one be bound. But it's different with a semi-entity. He had at least 10 ways to trap Voldemort. So, Voldemort also knows this is a trap against him. Of course, except for that fool Quirrell, who wouldn't know it's a trap. It's as if there's a sign at the door saying Philosopher's Stone inside. Of course, that fool Quirrell might have realized it too. Tewell ignored the chatter of the ring and looked at the symbol on his wrist. This was Dumbledore's gambit, but even if it was a trap, he would step into it. By the way, your main body can't deal with this curse either? The ring abruptly stopped and then smirked. You forget, curses are evil prophecies. Once tainted, there's no escape. Indeed, as the ring had mentioned, after Halloween, Quirrell's face became increasingly pale and his body would occasionally twitch. However, this suited Professor Quirrell's persona well, and apart from Tewell's deliberate observations, it didn't attract the attention of other students. Meanwhile, Tewell himself had immersed into the busy teaching routine, blending theory with practical lessons, which was quite suitable for Hogwarts. Particularly, as students discovered that theoretical learning could enhance practical skills, they began to value the knowledge in their textbooks more. Of course, Tewell's mind was occupied with his own affairs. Digesting the duel with Professor Flitwick, completed, feeling the peculiar charm of white magic, diverting some attention to this aspect. Dumbledore's weekly transfiguration research, significant progress, even causing the badges to react, can't afford to miss it. Private lessons with the Percy quintuplets, considering it as lesson preparation until finding the next opponent. Researching the nature and instincts of wizards on Navi, progressing slowly but seeing benefits, requires continuous study. Exploration of the 4 elements, progress nearly negligible, found only 3 books in the restricted section, 1 incomprehensible, 2 useless. Research on the unforgivable curses on hold. Wizard's chess practice, surpassing Percy completely, can now sustain a game for over half an hour. Marauder's map, performing as expected, need to improve proficiency in alchemy and map completeness to further address the magical flux issue. Training with dummy figures, obvious limits. Without improvement, the combat level will plateau around that of the Percy quintuplets, on hold temporarily until personal comprehension improves. Minor ghostly magic, a product of imitating ghosts, detaching from a body, seems to have a higher potential than training with dummies. Priority increased. Philosopher's Stone theft plan. Quirrell's focus has shifted to Snape. Progress has slowed down again, but Wizard's chess is progressing well, can prompt Quirrell appropriately to prevent premature death. If he's going to die, he should at least finish the job. In just over 2 months, Tewell had accomplished so much. Despite being accustomed to the busy schedule of study and research, he still felt a hint of fatigue. Of course, this was also because there were too many secrets in this school, leaving him reluctant to rest. With plenty of time still remaining and things progressing according to plan, he decided to take it step by step. First on the agenda was the Marauder's map. He was somewhat dissatisfied with the map's roughness, and there were only a few secret passages marked, ones he himself had noticed. If Harry and his friends were to hide in one of these passages, he wouldn't be able to detect them. However, to create a more detailed map would require a considerable amount of time to explore every detail of the castle, which he deemed not worth it. The best approach would be to obtain the original Marauder's map and merge the 2 maps. By combining their strengths and compensating for their weaknesses, he would naturally obtain a map that best suited his needs. Knock, knock, knock. The knocking interrupted his thoughts. Come in. The door automatically opened, revealing 5 figures jostling outside. It was the Percy quintuplets who attended his private lessons in the evenings. Percy, with his prefect badge shining on his chest, confidently led the way in, while the other 4 followed, stealthily behind. Tewell poured 5 cups of tea for them. His office now only had that since he had finished the pumpkin juice last night. I recall our private lesson hasn't begun yet. What brings you here? George nudged Percy forward, encouraging him to take a seat in front of Tewell. Percy took a sip of tea and said, "Since your wizard's chess skills are superior to mine, we discussed and decided to find a more formidable opponent for you." Now approaching mid-November, the dummy figures faced the threat of expiration once again, so they were eager to find the next sparring partner to play chess with the professor. Tewell folded the parchment in his hand. "There's no need. It would seem as if I only give you private lessons because of wizard's chess." Cedric and his companions exchanged a comforting glance. "Oh, by the way, who were you looking for?" Cedric asked. "It's Ron." Percy hesitated for a moment before reluctantly speaking. "Perfect." Tewell was still considering how to find an excuse to play wizard's chess with Ron legitimately. Now that Ron was coming voluntarily, wasn't it just perfect? Seeing Tewell's obvious smile, Percy's resolve strengthened. Learning wizard's chess well would definitely please the professors. "Well, since that's the case, bring Ron along when you come tonight." George hurriedly interjected, taking large strides forward. "Professor, what about the training dummy?" Over the past 2 months, they had learned a lot of practical skills from the training dummy. Though they were forced to learn, each time they ended up suspended from the ceiling, but it was still learning. Their progress was remarkably evident. All 4 of them were among the top 10 at the Halloween game, firmly dominating the third-year Quidditch game rankings. Tewell waved his hand dismissively. "Let's add another month, but that's the limit. If we keep battling, that dummy will collapse." Moreover, a month later, he wouldn't need these people to play chess with him. The 5 of them immediately broke into joyous smiles. A month was sufficient. They had nearly reached the limit of what they could learn from the training dummy. Another month wouldn't significantly enhance their training effectiveness with the dummy, so they were content with that. Their objective achieved, they intended to leave. However, at that moment, Tewell halted the Weasley twins. "George and Fred, do you have your badges with you?" The twins turned back with some confusion. The The ones from Halloween? We've been carrying them." As they spoke, they retrieved them from their pockets. "Give them to me for now. Don't worry, I'll just make some improvements for you, and I'll return them to you later." The twins felt somewhat reluctant. The badges were so useful, they could even replenish magical energy and be reused. However, since the badges were given by the professor, and they could get them back, they left with peace of mind. Tewell took the 2 badges, inspected them, and contemplated how to improve them. He didn't have time to explore the castle's details, but the Weasley twins did. As long as he could devise a detection spell for their badges, automatically charting the terrain they had visited and then feeding it back to the map, it would be fine. Of course, easier said than done. There were quite a few issues involved. The biggest was the problem of magical energy reserves. A badge could only contain the magic of a few shield charms. Once depleted, it would become ineffective and need recharging. Now, if a continuous detection spell was added, it would likely need recharging every few hours. Not to mention whether the twins would be willing. Just the frequent recharging would be enough to make the students notice something unusual. So he still needed to enhance the magical energy storage inside. The arrival of November also marks the official start of the Quidditch season for this academic year. Today is the first Quidditch match of the school year, with Gryffindor facing Slytherin, promising plenty of excitement. It's not just a showdown between 2 old rivals, but also the debut of the youngest Seeker in Hogwarts history. And to top it off, the Seeker happens to be the highly talked about Harry Potter. No student would want to miss such a match, so the Quidditch pitch is already filled with students securing the best seats early in the morning. An hour before the match begins, the stands are already bustling with excited students. Today's weather is clear, but November in Britain is starting to get chilly, leaving Harry feeling cold and numb despite the sunshine. As a Quidditch player, Harry can afford to arrive at the pitch a bit later. Right now, he's walking alone towards the players' changing room, his mind a jumble of thoughts, unable to discern if it's emptiness or chaos. "I heard you didn't even have breakfast." A hand suddenly extends from beside him, holding out a piece of chocolate. It's plain dark chocolate, more bitter than the others, but it brings him more joy than the sweetest chocolate could. Harry instantly smiles, turning to see Professor Tewell smiling beside him. "Professor." He suddenly remembers something. It's my first match today, so..." Tewell places the chocolate in his hand. "You still need to eat something, or you'll lack the energy to perform even if you have the heart to do so." Watching him obediently take a bite, his expression a mix of pain and pleasure, Tewell laughs happily. It doesn't have to be this bitter, but it's Professor Pomfrey's suggestion. She believes a little bitterness helps students remember things better. "I have a friend who was a Seeker for the Quidditch team. On his first day, he was so nervous that he forgot how to fly and spent 20 minutes on the ground before getting on his broom." Harry couldn't help but laugh at this. He could imagine a Seeker struggling on the ground for so long before finally taking off. At least he wasn't that bad. "But that game ended in 30 minutes because my friend caught the golden snitch in just 10 minutes. Even now, at the age of 14, he's already a Durmstrang, the best Seeker in their country." Harry's mouth dropped open in surprise, chocolate residue clear on his teeth, but his eyes were filled with admiration. So even someone as skilled as him could be nervous at first. "All right," said Tewell, escorting Harry to the changing room and patting him on the shoulder. "Go in there and show everyone the debut of Hogwarts' future top Seeker." Watching the dazed Harry disappear, Tewell turned and headed for the spectator stands. He hadn't planned on coming to the match today. He wasn't particularly interested in Quidditch, at least not enough to study badges. But he suddenly remembered that in the plot, Quirrell would go after Harry today. He was worried that he might change the plot and harm Harry in another way, so he came to escort him. To be honest, he still couldn't figure out why Quirrell would go after Harry. If something happened to Harry now, Dumbledore would definitely become suspicious. It wouldn't matter if Quirrell got caught. It would be worse if he was found out. The only reasonable explanation he could think of was that this was an order from Voldemort himself. Only he would harbor such deep hatred towards Harry. Arriving at the stands, Professor Flitwick stood on his seat, waving frantically to Tewell. Professor McGonagall was also sitting nearby, but her attention was on the players who were already on the field. Tewell only snapped out of his thoughts when he sat down beside her. "Why are you so late?" Professor McGonagall casually asked. Only when she arrived at her favorite Quidditch pitch would she not be as serious and formal as usual. "Just a little delay." They chatted aimlessly, and suddenly, a sharp whistle sounded in the middle of the pitch, and the 14 players from both Quidditch teams mounted their brooms and flew into the sky. At the same time, the game balls followed suit. Accompanied by the cheers of the young wizards, the match officially began. Tewell really didn't understand Quidditch. Even though he had a friend who was proficient in Quidditch at Durmstrang, he only had a vague understanding of the rules. Fortunately, there was Professor McGonagall, a former Quidditch player from many years ago. Few people knew that Professor McGonagall was a Gryffindor player and even served as captain during her time at Hogwarts. It was only in her 7th year that she had to give up her greatest passion due to a nearly fatal match. However, her love for Quidditch remained undiminished, although she now detested unsportsmanlike Quidditch moves even more. Are they a bunch of trolls? Do they only know how to ram into opponents with their bodies? Flint is attacking players with his bat. "Referee, get this bastard off the pitch." "Oh my goodness, that despicable kid just elbowed my player." Professor McGonagall muttered angrily to herself, her excited fists hammering her thighs. Yeah, she seemed to hate it very much. Professor Flitwick was not surprised by this. Minerva just gets passionate when it comes to Quidditch, but other than that, she's usually quite serious. "What about you? You don't seem very interested in Quidditch." If your students are casual about Quidditch, you'll be as calm as I am. But at that moment, Professor McGonagall let out a loud gasp. "What's wrong with Potter?" Tewell and Flitwick stopped their idle chatter and turned to look. Harry's broom suddenly seemed like a wild horse off its reins, tossing and turning in the air, trying to shake Harry off. In just a moment, Harry was thrown off, with only his hands tightly gripping the broom to prevent himself from falling. Soon, everyone noticed the situation and exclaimed in shock, just like Professor McGonagall. "Someone must have tampered with Potter's broom." Professor Flitwick exclaimed loudly. His booming voice drowned out the students' exclamations and redirected everyone's attention to the issue with the broom. "It's impossible. Flying brooms are very sophisticated alchemical devices, with more protective magic inside than I've ever seen." A senior student immediately rebutted upon noticing that it was Professor Flitwick who spoke. But realizing this, he quickly corrected himself. "Of course, Professor. You must be more correct." Tewell chuckled and shook his head. He glanced at Quirrell's position not far away, sitting at the back, muttering to himself. Not only him, but Snape in front was also muttering incantations. But one was casting a spell, the other was undoing it. If Snape just turned his head, he would naturally notice something amiss with Quirrell and scare off his magic. It was probably due to concern that Snape abandoned his observation of the surroundings because of Harry's accident. At this moment, a fire suddenly broke out on the seats of the staff stand, causing chaos among the professors on this side. But these flames behaved obediently in Tewell's hands, jumping into the sky and disappearing with the flick of his wand. After doing all this, he blinked at the crouching Hermione, startling the young witch. At this moment, the students erupted into cheers. Harry, who had remounted his broom, caught the golden snitch. Although it was a bit embarrassing, and he almost swallowed the snitch, Harry ultimately helped Gryffindor defeat Slytherin. Hagrid's cabin. After the match, Harry brought Hermione and Ron here to have afternoon tea with Hagrid, coincidentally discussing their discoveries. "I was just found by Professor Fawley," Hermione said, still feeling a bit frightened. Hagrid handed her a cup of strong tea and asked in confusion, "Found what by Fawley?" "He found Hermione casting a spell on Snape." Ron replied matter-of-factly, "But why didn't he expose you?" Hermione held the teacup in her hands, pondering, but Hagrid became anxious. Why would Hermione cast a spell on Snape? "How could you treat a professor like this?" he asked, looking at them with concern. He hadn't even noticed Hermione's brief disappearance, let alone what happened on the staff stand. The weirdness with Harry's broom was because Snape was casting a spell on it, Ron said, picking up a rock cake casually. I saw him muttering incantations. Nonsense. If Fawley could find Hermione casting a spell, he surely would have noticed Snape casting one too. Hagrid slammed the teapot down heavily. Hermione's expression was conflicted, her hands gripping the teacup tightly, as if she wanted to crush it, her fingers turning white from the force. But what if Fawley and Snape are in cahoots? Impossible, Harry retorted immediately. Professor Fawley is so kind, and Snape is just the opposite. How could they collude? Hermione released her grip on the teacup and gently placed her hand in the pocket of her robe, where the handkerchief the professor had given her was kept. She didn't want to make unwarranted assumptions about the professor. But think about it, we met Fawley on the 4th floor before, and on Halloween, Snape also tried to get past that three-headed dog. Wait, how do you know about what happened on the 4th floor with Fluffy? Fluffy, that's what I lent to Dumbledore to guard. Guard what? Harry asked eagerly. That's none of your concern. But Professor Fawley and Snape wanted to steal that thing. Impossible. If Fawley was involved, why would he let Hermione disrupt Snape's spell? Ron rubbed his chin thoughtfully, discreetly putting the rock cake back. The thing almost knocked his teeth out. Is it possible that Fawley is a good person who doesn't want to harm Harry, but still wants to steal that thing? Harry's eyes lit up. Hagrid shook his head angrily. Impossible. No good person would want to steal from Nicholas Flamel. Harry's eyes widened. Oh, so that thing belongs to Nicholas Flamel, right? Hagrid furiously drove the three out of the hut. He decided to lock himself in and sulk for the day. Outside the hut, Hermione was still pondering about Professor Fawley. No, I have to go ask the professor myself. Ron and Harry quickly stopped her. Are you crazy? Are you going to ask the professor if he plans to steal something from the 4th floor? Ron imitated Hermione's questioning posture before dissuading her from her impulse. But what if the professor really wants to steal that thing? What should we do? Hermione asked helplessly. Ron shrugged nonchalantly. Maybe we can even help the professor out. Hermione burst out laughing incredulously. Professor Fawley is just a suspect, isn't he? Ron, don't you play wizard chess with him every day? You could try to sound him out. Harry suddenly suggested. Ron immediately shook his head and waved his hand. Forget it. I finally have the chance to get guidance from the professor. I don't want to ruin it with a suspicion. And when you face the professor for an hour, it's like his eyes can see right through you. I wouldn't dare to bring up something like this. Although George and them say the professor's knowledge is so vast that he can see through my thoughts at a glance. But I always feel something's not right. He thought of that scenario for a moment, suddenly shuddering and refusing outright. Harry hadn't experienced such a thing, but he immediately pictured himself facing Snape. Let's forget it then. Let's first investigate about Nicholas Flamel. Once we know what's hidden there, it won't be too late to make a decision. The other two sighed in relief. They didn't want to question Professor Fawley either. Wait, are we just assuming that Snape wants to steal something? Hermione noticed a blind spot. Thinking about Snape's differential treatment of him, Harry exclaimed, compared to Professor Fawley, I'll believe Snape is up to anything. On the other side, Tewell was still unaware of his natural talent for taking the blame from Snape, and even if he knew, he would just laugh it off, because he really was going to steal the Philosopher's Stone. Defense against the dark arts classroom. Professor, am I really terrible at magic? Neville cried. They were practicing stable magic output, but after failing for the 10th time, Neville's confidence, which had been carefully cultivated, began to collapse. In previous lessons, Tewell helped Neville learn to output magic and successfully cast spells. But there was another issue here. When using magic like the Levitation charm that has a continuous effect, Neville's magical connection would unconsciously disconnect after a certain period of time. It was somewhat akin to the magical point map made by Tewell, where the connection between the badge and the map would suddenly break. This sparked his curiosity. Don't be discouraged. I can assure you, your magical talent is absolutely on par with any student in the castle. It's just that your foundation isn't solid enough. You need to practice multiple times. Be prepared to spend twice as much practice time as others. Neville sniffed and held back the tears that were about to fall. I'm not afraid of practicing more than others. It's just, I feel like I'm wasting your time and guidance. How could that be? Teaching students is what teachers do. Come on, lift your wand again. This time, slow down the magical output a bit. It's better to slow down and try to maintain a continuous output. Neville was deeply moved. The tears he had just stopped couldn't help but flow again. He now only had one feeling. If possible, I want to be the professor's student for life. He wiped away the tears decisively, pursed his lips tightly, and his round face was filled with determination. I can't cry anymore, and I can't disappoint the professor anymore. He aimed his wand at the small ball on the ground. Wingardium Leviosa. The small ball slowly floated up and came in Neville's front. Very good. Your pronunciation of this spell is much better than most students. Control the ball to stay in the air, but don't stop the magical output. Neville's little face was drumming, his eyes staring straight at the ball, watching it become somewhat unstable. He quickly became more focused on the magical output. Completely absorbed, he didn't realize that this attempt took longer than before, long enough for his magic to run out before he snapped out of it. Sweat beaded on his forehead due to the depletion of magic, but Neville's eyes were filled with joy. Professor, I finally did it. His tears filled his eyes once again. No, I promised I wouldn't cry. Neville thought to himself, then blinked hard, trying to hold back the tears. Tewell's expression was somewhat strange as he clapped his hands and asked tentatively, "Can you try failing again?" Neville. With the arrival of December, after a heavy snowfall, everything was draped in white, and the winter sunlight cast a golden glow over the ancient castle. Early in the morning, a few young wizards were having a snowball fight in front of the castle gates. Standing at the window of his office, Tewell immediately spotted the familiar figures of the Weasley twins. The two of them were using magic to control a snowball, chasing each other's heads relentlessly. This was a new variation derived from the Lumos Ball game. After the students learned to release the Lumos Ball from the Lumos charm, Tewell taught them to control the Lumos Ball with the Levitation charm to attack another Lumos Ball. Of course, only third-year students could do this for now, while the other 2 years still played the Lumos Ball game twice a week. To accommodate multiple students playing the game simultaneously, he quietly expanded the area behind the classroom. Snap! George's snowball hit Quirrell, who was passing by, squarely on the back of his head. This was the second time, and judging by Quirrell's expression, they would probably face severe punishment again. That idiot's days are numbered, the ring said gleefully. What's your plan when the time comes? Your true form still needs him to get the Philosopher's Stone. He won't die so easily. Life and death aren't up to him. He's not like you. How else can Quirrell prolong his life? Tewell's gaze shifted to the Forbidden Forest. Of course, it's the unicorn. The Forbidden Forest has all sorts of treasures. That's so wicked. If it were me, I'd rather die than touch unicorn blood. Don't pretend. That's not like you. Hee hee. I'll try to be more convincing next time, the ring said, flattering. Tewell would never believe the nonsense of this ring. As the soul of Voldemort, it constantly attempted to drain his life force and lure him into the addiction of dark magic. All the flattery, friendliness, and such were just disguises for the evil lurking within. However, the Forbidden Forest did indeed pique his curiosity. The reason could be traced back to Neville. Ever since discovering that Neville's magic would abruptly cut off, he noticed a problem. Is the output of magic akin to a kite or a cannonball? The difference lies in the former being accompanied by a controllable magical thread, while the latter is not. Once released, it's out of control. According to conventional understanding, spells like the Levitation charm that can be controlled by the caster are kites, while spells like the Disarming charm are cannonballs. If it weren't for Neville, Tewell would have held this belief for a lifetime, or rather, it would have been the viewpoint of everyone in the magical world. But Neville was different. His magic always seemed to be tethered to a thread. In other words, Neville's kite didn't have a broken string, but would suddenly plummet. This indicated that the thread pulling the kite might have another one. Conveniently, Tewell made a breakthrough in soul research. Combining the two, he discovered another thread hidden beneath the magic, the will. Through his research on Neville during this period, his understanding of magic and souls had been further elevated. Every bit of magic would tug at a strand of the essence of the caster. Even if it was the disarming charm being cast, your will would still exist, only that no one had noticed this, leading to the seemingly uncontrollable nature of such magic. Of course, Tewell couldn't guarantee that he was the only one who realized this, but regardless, this discovery greatly enhanced his control over magic. However, investigating the source of willpower was extremely taxing on both his magical and mental faculties. Despite this, he was excitedly in his office all night, meticulously examining the source of willpower behind every bit of magic, even if it meant depleting his magical energy. The wallet of traceless extension charm, leading to his body. The book protected by magic, leading to an untouchable void. The ironclad badge made by Davis and Vance, leading to a small house in Hogwarts. And the Hogwarts badge he brought, leading to the depths of the Forbidden Forest. If the spell caster dies, logically, it should lead to the void, where it is likely the world of the dead. But this badge actually leads to the Forbidden Forest. Does this mean that the maker of the badge is not only alive, but also likely living well in the Forbidden Forest? This discovery sent shivers down his spine. However, amidst the panic, he considered another question. If the badge could help him delay death, could the maker of the badge help him avoid death? His body was still trembling, but this time he was not afraid but excited. After pondering all night, he decided to explore the depths of the Forbidden Forest. Fortunately, it was the weekend these days, and he had plenty of time to study the secrets deep within the Forbidden Forest. After making some preparations and restoring his magical powers, at noon, Tewell avoided the students and headed towards the Forbidden Forest. Having been at Hogwarts for 3 months, this was his first time entering the Forbidden Forest, but standing on the edge, he realized the eerie nature of this forest. One word to describe it: vast. Standing in the castle and looking down, the Forbidden Forest was at most just an ordinary forest, larger than usual forests, but only about twice as big, and one could see the peaks at the end with a glance. But standing on the edge of the Forbidden Forest, Tewell's senses told him that the forest was deeper than he had imagined. This was quite strange. How could the forest be so large that it felt even deeper? This discovery made him more cautious about the Forbidden Forest. As soon as he reached the edge, he took out his wand. He left a magical sensor on the edge to facilitate his perception of the distance he traveled. Following an obvious path deliberately carved out, Tewell moved forward. This should be the path Hagrid opened to facilitate his patrols of the Forbidden Forest. But inside the Forbidden Forest was much like any other forest, except for the sudden appearance of acromantulas. It was completely normal. After dealing with another acromantula, the trees here became denser, with only dappled dim light indicating that much time had passed. Pulling out his pocket watch, it was now 6 in the evening, meaning he had been walking for 5 hours. But he had prepared to stay in the Forbidden Forest for 2 days, so after a brief rest, he continued on. After another hour of walking, Tewell suddenly noticed that the woods became much denser, no longer like before where there was enough space between the trees to pitch a tent, and the vegetation on the ground became denser as well. The Forbidden Forest seemed even more eerie. Normally, forests would have significant gaps like those in front, because the leaves needed sunlight for photosynthesis to grow. Without sunlight, small trees covered by shade couldn't grow, not even sprout. Similarly, without the sun's arrival on the forest floor, flowers and grasses struggled to grow. Even in pristine forests untouched by humans, animal tracks would create clearings. But this place was different. The presence of plants was much stronger here, while animal tracks became very scarce. This gave Tewell a sense of illusion. This forest seemed unfathomable and endless. This discovery didn't make Tewell recoil. On the contrary, his lips stretched into a wide grin. This was the first time he had smiled so happily since arriving at Hogwarts, because he had sensed the secret of the Forbidden Forest. It was an untraceable expansion charm. Someone had cast an unbelievable, untraceable expansion charm on the Forbidden Forest. You see, this spell is usually used in relatively confined spaces, as only such spaces offer the potential for expansion. But the caster of the Forbidden Forest had forcibly expanded this vast area. This is also why, although the Forbidden Forest is merely a visible forest, it can give people an unfathomable feeling. This immense power only fueled Tewell's curiosity even more. He pulled out his badge, feeling the will it guided above, also making it easier for him to correct his direction. However, the path ahead was somewhat strange, with sparse and dense areas coexisting. You could see desolate sandy areas like deserts, but there would also be lush vegetation nearby. It was as if the creator were playing a creation game, sowing seeds and then removing unwanted parts. But compared to the area he had just passed through, this place was much livelier and more peaceful. Occasionally, some ordinary small animals would scurry around, and a little rabbit would stare blankly at Tewell, as if it had never seen a biped before. There were also more bird calls and insect sounds, which seemed very harmonious and melodious, causing Tewell to relax completely. Suddenly, an arrow shot out fiercely and landed in the empty space in front of him. The feathers at the end of the arrow were still trembling violently, indicating the tremendous force behind the shot. Tewell dispelled the ironclad spell in his hand and looked toward the direction of the chaotic footsteps. Before long, two horses appeared before him, each with a person on top. More accurately, the lower half of a horse and the upper half of a person were spliced together, and the upper bodies were not wearing clothes, with quivers tied behind them and bows in their hands. The Centaurs, rumored to have migrated to the Forbidden Forest, seemed to be them. The one on the left, with its black mane and rugged appearance, had a stubble beard and looked wild and proud, with a fierce temperament, glaring angrily at Tewell. The one on the right was much more pleasing to the eye, handsome with striking blue eyes and shiny platinum blonde hair. Not only was the upper part of his body attractive, but the lower half was also a silver body with a silver horse's tail, displaying an extraordinary beauty. Compared to the one beside him, one couldn't help but marvel at the disparities among centaurs. Tewell took the initiative to question, "Who are you? Why are you attacking me?" The handsome centaur took 2 steps forward. "Human wizard, this is centaur territory. Please leave as soon as possible." The ugly-tempered centaur interjected rudely, "Leave immediately, or my arrows won't hesitate." Tewell frowned and glanced at the ugly centaur, silencing him. "I don't know about any centaur territory. All I know is that this is within the boundaries of Hogwarts. As a professor of the school, I have the right to traverse the Forbidden Forest." However, judging from the arrow just now, the centaurs didn't seem as weak as rumored. On the contrary, there was still magic lingering on the arrow, indicating that the strength of these two might surpass many adult wizards. The handsome centaur looked at his companion in surprise, realizing that the professor in front of him was much stronger than he had imagined. "Well, Professor, I am Firenze, and this is Bane. We did not mean to offend you, but we centaurs have an agreement with Hogwarts. Without permission, wizards cannot enter our dwelling places." Firenze declared politely but firmly to Tewell, "I am Tewell Fawley, just passing through, not interested in where you centaurs reside." Tewell didn't want to conflict with the centaurs, as it didn't fit his current persona. "No," Bane suddenly spoke up, "I've seen too many of your kind pretending to pass through, but actually spying on us wizards." "Seen too many?" "Except for desperate wizards. No one would want to live in the Forbidden Forest, right? I'm curious, how many wizards have you seen?" Bane suddenly became tongue-tied, his face under the beard turning red. Originally a bluff, Tewell thought amusedly. "Since you know about Hogwarts, I assume you wouldn't want to engage in conflict with us. Besides, I'm just passing through." Bane remained speechless, but Firenze took the lead, slowly approaching Tewell. "Professor Fawley, I need to understand the purpose of entering the Forbidden Forest. As far as I know, except for Hagrid and Professor Kettleburn, other professors do not venture into the Forbidden Forest casually, especially its depths." He maintained a gentle, friendly demeanor, but his gaze turned sharp. But Tewell suddenly realized a problem. The Centaurs lived in the Forbidden Forest, so perhaps they had already sensed the forest situation. So he decided to probe the Centaur's attitude. I'm curious, who has the power to cast such advanced magic on the Forbidden Forest and come in to explore? As expected, Bane's face suddenly changed, showing a mix of surprise, fear, anger, and other complex emotions. Firenze, who had previously been smiling, furrowed his brow even more. Professor, since you can perceive the profound magic of the Forbidden Forest, why not leave now to avoid angering that person? Which person? Tewell's eyes flickered with a glimmer of light, but his legitimacy spell failed. Firenze erupted in anger, stringing his bow, ready to attack Tewell immediately. Behind him, Bane, seeing this scene, was so surprised that he didn't stop his hands, completing his attack preparations in an instant. Unexpectedly finding himself in a predicament with the Centaurs, Tewell waved his wand helplessly. Soul departure. The two Centaurs froze in place, their eyes filled with confusion. He knew that it was difficult to use legitimacy on wizards who had practiced occlumency. It was like a battle between spear and shield. Only the battlefield was on the defensive side, so occlumency of the same level was superior to legitimacy. But at Tewell's level, being blocked by two Centaurs was honestly unexpected. Have you practiced occlumency? Tewell asked straightforwardly. The two under the control of the Soul Departure Curse were somewhat clumsy, but they shook their heads simultaneously. We don't even know what occlumency is. How could we have practiced it? TW. Tewell felt like his brain wasn't enough. Now, even Centaurs who hadn't heard of occlumency could resist his legitimacy? Then who was the person you just mentioned? Firenze's expression twisted, as if trying to break free from the Soul Departure Curse's control, but his mouth still involuntarily opened. Helga Hufflepuff. After saying this name, Firenze's expression became extremely sinister, and his eyes gradually cleared up. Tewell quickly said, "No need to say more." He deepened the control to calm down the Centaurs. Let me share a little knowledge about casting the Soul Departure Curse. The control of the Soul Departure Curse depends on the abilities of both the caster and the controlled individual, much like how Dumbledore can easily control Harry, but not vice versa. However, there is one exception. It cannot seriously violate the will of the controlled individual, as strong emotional fluctuations can disrupt the control of the Soul Departure Curse. But this is only established under the condition of comparable strength. Like Harry, there is no way he could escape from the curse. So Tewell was very curious. Just a name made Firenze almost break free from the curse, surpassing him in strength. The name is Helga Hufflepuff, known to anyone familiar with Hogwarts. Even if you don't know the first name, the surname is renowned in the wizarding world. Hogwarts' 4 houses are named after the surnames of its 4 founders. Among them, Hufflepuff House corresponds to this Helga Hufflepuff. As one of the founders of Hogwarts, Helga was known for her modesty. Surprisingly, her food magic was the most well-known, and the Hogwarts kitchen was her masterpiece. But few knew that she was actually a master herbalist, and food magic might have been just a small hobby for her amidst her herbal studies. After all, it's normal for a herbalist to research whether herbs taste good or not, right? It's just, according to Firenze, if the traceless stretching curse in the Forbidden Forest was cast by Helga Hufflepuff, is she the one hidden deep in the Forbidden Forest? Then was the badge also made by her? Even this figure from 1,000 years ago is still alive. The techniques for immortality in the wizarding world are not unheard of. Both the Philosopher's Stone and Horcruxes can achieve eternal life. With the power of the Founders, achieving this is not unimaginable. The curiosity in Tewell's heart could no longer be suppressed. He carefully controlled Firenze and slowly lured him into revealing information about Helga and the Centaurs. 1,000 years ago, after wizards gained the help of wands, their power increased greatly, and they began encroaching on the living space of other magical creatures. The Centaurs occupying the grasslands were the first to suffer. Despite the Centaurs' strength, wizards became even stronger, and their population outnumbered the Centaurs by far. Therefore, countless Centaurs died or were injured, and large areas of their habitats were occupied. Since then, the Centaurs have been driven by wizards to one harsh environment after another, living in exile and distress. Fortunately, Helga Hufflepuff intervened at this time, blocking the wizards who were hunting the Centaurs and bringing the Centaurs who were willing to follow her to this forest to settle down. At that time, the Forbidden Forest was still just a small forest, but under Helga's magic, it gradually became the vast expanse it is today. Most of the magical creatures inside were brought here by Helga, who couldn't bear to see them captured by wizards, to live together and enjoy her protection. Wait, living together? Wasn't Helga living in the castle? Tewell asked in confusion because the Centaur's tone didn't seem to imply that magical creatures were living here, as if there was also Helga's residence here. Firenze nodded. Since a founder left the castle and Helga sadly left her property to her descendants, she came to the center of the Forbidden Forest and has been living there ever since. Tewell's eyes suddenly became fervent. That's right, this badge must be Helga's work. In that case, Helga might have been living in the center of the Forbidden Forest all along. Then please, quickly take me to the center of the Forbidden Forest and find Helga's residence. Impossible. Bane suddenly shook his head. The Centaurs have been searching for hundreds of years, only to see endless forests, never finding any place that resembles the dwelling of Lady Helga. Tewell rolled his eyes impatiently. Then how can you be so sure that Helga resides in the Forbidden Forest? He blushed immediately, muttering incomprehensible phrases like "since ancient times," "legend has it so," passed down from mouth to mouth. Firenze did tell Tewell that the magical creatures in the Forbidden Forest have always been protected by magic cast by Helga, which can protect them to a certain extent. Therefore, the Centaurs firmly believe that Helga has been sheltering the Forbidden Forest. Upon hearing this, Tewell became even more convinced of his speculation. It didn't matter to the Centaurs whether they knew Helga's whereabouts or not. With the guidance of the badge, Tewell could find Helga's location by himself. So after erasing the memories of the two Centaurs, he bid them farewell amicably and, holding the badge again, ventured deeper into the forest. It seemed like Tewell's emotions were sensed, as the pull from the badge became increasingly evident. Even more noticeable were the creatures dwelling within. Even the rarest creatures like unicorns, mooncalves, and diricals were occasionally encountered. Especially the diricals, which normally wouldn't stay in one place, but here he saw no fewer than 3. Compared to the vastness of the outskirts, this place felt like a paradise, a small world created by a wizard. The more magical creatures he encountered, the more excited Tewell became. The badge in his hand even started to emit a slight warmth, as if the magic inside was as restless as his excited heart. But this journey was longer than before, lasting from night till dawn, a full 15 hours. He had to rest several times in between, eating a little food to sustain himself. The pull of the thread pointed straight in one direction, but seemed to have no end, testing Tewell's patience, until he reached a vertically suspended golden thread. This thread was very thin, about the size of a doorknob, suspended in midair. In the sunlight, it was barely visible unless observed carefully. If it weren't for the sudden surge of magic from the badge, alerting Tewell, he might have missed it just like the Centaurs. Yes, he seemed to have figured out the secret of this golden thread. As Tewell approached, the golden thread faintly emitted a golden light, trembling in the air as if blown by the wind. His hand slowly reached for the golden thread, and as soon as he grasped it, the entire world seemed to flip in an instant, compressing and needing space. All of these sensations occurred very quickly and disappeared just as quickly, as if opening a door to space. Tewell entered a new space. Inside was a very simple room, so plain that it wouldn't be an exaggeration to call it the room of a Muggle farmer with various herbs. But Tewell didn't notice the decoration of the room. At first glance, he was deeply attracted by the lady in front of him. She was a gentle lady. Her smile seemed to be permanently fixed on her lips, and her deep eyes had a comforting power. She was sitting in front of a desk, smiling at him. "Welcome, young man." Her voice was gentle, more soothing than her smile and eyes combined. As she spoke, the herbs planted in the room seemed to come to life, gently swaying. "Hello." Tewell bowed respectfully, unable to afford any disrespect to such a figure. "I presume you are Lady Holga Hufflepuff?" Holga tilted her head slightly, a playful glint in her eyes. "And what about you, young visitor? Could you tell me your name? And how much time has passed since you left?" "My apologies for not introducing myself first." Tewell bowed slightly. "You may call me Tewell Fawley, current professor of dark arts defense at Hogwarts. As for the time, it has been 1,000 years." There was a flicker of excitement in Tewell's eyes. This was indeed the Holga from a millennium ago. 1,000 years. Holga seemed intrigued, inspecting him with newfound interest. 1,000 years have passed, and are all the professors in the school as young as you?" she inquired. Feeling a sense of ease in the pleasant atmosphere, Tewell relaxed a bit. "I am the only one, as I am exceptionally talented." "Then can you tell me, young and talented professor, how you found your way here?" Holga asked with a light laugh. As they delved into the matter at hand, Tewell's expression turned serious and earnest. He raised the badge in his hand. It was the guidance of this badge. Holga's gaze sharpened, the warmth in her eyes giving way to a sharpness, showing the aura of this legendary wizard. "Can you give me this badge?" she asked abruptly. This question puzzled Tewell. If the badge was made by Holga, she should have a better understanding of it than him and wouldn't reveal such an expression. Things seemed to be heading in an unknown direction. He stepped forward and placed the badge in Holga's outstretched palm. In the meantime, he also observed this figure from 1,000 years ago. Her hands were not delicate, with rough calluses from work and scratches from thorns. After receiving the badge, Holga first explored the animals representing the 4 houses on it, and as her fingers touched the Hufflepuff badger, it seemed to respond joyfully, leaping slightly. With a look of reminiscence in her eyes, the badge's magic was continuously stimulated by her touch, emanating waves of vitality. Standing beside her, Tewell seemed like a sponge, absorbing this hard-earned vitality with each inhale and exhale. He raised his right wrist, where the dark mark was gradually being washed away by the vitality, the protruding snake slowly receding, and the skull symbol gradually dissolving and shrinking. In the end, only a tiny bit remained, unaffected by the vitality's wash. After multiple futile attempts, the vitality, no longer wasted, retreated back into Tewell's body. "This is a powerful curse," Holga concluded, puzzled. "People often speak of curses, but in reality, they are just destructive magic with continuous effects, hardly worthy of the term curse. But what you have on you is like an evil prophecy?" Tewell finished her sentence, because those were the words the ring had spoken just before being sealed, and it was because of this sentence that he had been carrying the ring, trying to find a solution from it. Holga's face lit up with realization. Indeed, a prophecy. That's a fitting term. It seems that wizard's magic has improved quite a bit over the past 1,000 years. "Then can you help me remove this curse?" Tewell asked eagerly. It was his primary purpose for coming here, to rid himself of this damned curse. However, to his disappointment, Holga shook her head gently. "If you understand the nature of this curse, you'll know it has become a part of your destiny," she explained. "Before it tainted you, you could easily dispel it, but once it has taken hold, it becomes a part of your fate. Unless..." Tewell's despondent eyes suddenly lit up. "Unless what?" Holga pondered for a moment, then raised the badge in her hand. "Unless you can find the maker of this badge. If I'm not mistaken, as a seer, she possesses the ability to evade fate. But isn't the maker of this badge you? I followed its magic to find my way here." Tewell furrowed his brow, seeking clarification. Holga shook her head, but a mischievous smile played on her lips. "Indeed, a part of the magic does originate from me. To be precise, the release of vitality is done through my magic. But in reality, The badge is a fusion of the magic of all four of us, she continued. For people? The four founders, you mean? Tewell's skepticism deepened. What kind of individuals could achieve such a feat? Of course her. Helga smiled, pointing at the eagle on the badge. Rowena Ravenclaw. Tewell's eyes widened suddenly. When he met Helga, he had vaguely guessed whether all four founders were still alive. Is Lady Ravenclaw still alive? As soon as the words left his mouth, Helga burst into laughter, as if he had told a very funny joke, her laughter ringing out clearly in the small room. Alive? She chuckled. Where did you get that idea? Her eyes shifted, pointing to herself with her finger. You don't think I'm alive, do you? Only then did Tewell realize he might have been mistaken. He pursed his lips, focusing his gaze on Helga's body. She also felt Tewell's gaze and welcomed it openly, her smile still intact. Do you see it now? Tewell nodded helplessly. Your current state indeed cannot be described as alive. To be precise, Helga's current state was more like a soul, more complete than a ghost, but it still couldn't be called alive. As part of my research on vitality, I successfully created a semblance of a soul. Of course, the dissipation of the flesh is inevitable. Helga gestured to a corner of the room. But I don't have a preference for people seeing my ashes, she shrugged playfully. A semblance of a soul? Of course, this is only a part of my will. The real me has long gone to pursue new journeys. Tewell suddenly understood. Even with immense vitality, legendary figures like Helga weren't the type to evade death. For the powerful, death was just another great adventure. Understanding Helga's condition, Tewell's heart relaxed. He didn't want to deal with the four founders in the future. Since that's the case, where is Ms. Ravenclaw? Helga tilted her head mischievously once again. If she looked a bit younger, she would resemble an elf frolicking in the jungle. Guess. However, she handed the badge back, implying something to Tewell. You mean the badge will show the whereabouts of the other three founders? Tewell took the badge and examined it carefully. Compared to the other three animals frozen in place, the badger representing Hufflepuff on it had become much more lively. Its eyes even shimmered with light, as if truly coming alive. But this time, it no longer pulled out the thread of will, not even Hufflepuff's thread. Seeing Tewell's puzzled expression, Helga chuckled lightly. You have to invoke the magic above to perceive the threads. How do I invoke the magic then? In the past, the badge would automatically activate once I deepened my understanding of magic. Helga's expression suddenly became strange, but her question was even stranger. Are you a normal person? A question mark slowly popped up over Tewell's head. What do you mean? She wore an even more perplexed expression than Tewell, slowly saying, From what I understand, to solely rely on understanding of magic to activate this badge, you need to make significant progress at the very least. If the ordinary person's learning of magic is like walking, then you must be flying in the sky, or flying extremely fast, so fast that you leave no shadow. Helga suddenly stood up, walking to Tewell and looking at him even more seriously than before. This speed is already beyond what ordinary magic can achieve. At least, it requires studying dark magic or reaching an extremely advanced level to achieve such exaggerated progress. Facing her gaze, Tewell averted his eyes and said lightly, If it were you, you would make the same choice as me. She placed her hand on Tewell's shoulder. Don't worry about that, child. Studying dark magic was quite normal for us back then. But if you want to continue to invoke the magic of the badge, you need to focus on other aspects. That's also the correct way to use the badge. For example, do you know the legend of the four elements? Tewell lifted his head in astonishment, staring straight at Helga, trying to find something from her eyes. Seeing this, Helga softly said, The four elements are the key to activating the badge. As long as you can grasp their essence, the badge will respond to you. But Tewell hesitated before saying, I've found several books, but they only describe the characteristics of the four elements. There's no method for studying the four elements, and I have no clue about understanding them. Leaning forward, Helga whispered in Tewell's ear, Because it's not something you can learn. Then, With a force that didn't match her demeanor, she pushed him abruptly. Unexpectedly, Tewell couldn't maintain his balance and fell straight backward. But the moment his back touched the ground, it was as if he sank into the earth, seeing a world beneath the soil. Various colors of soil interwove like entangled fabrics, forming a canvas displayed before him. At the same time, the figure of Helga appeared beside him, her expression becoming more solemn. Did you see that? This is the power of the land. When it remains still, it's like a giant. But when this giant awakens, as she waved her hand, the piece of cloth seemed to be stirred by the wind, gently floating for a moment. But even with just that slight movement, the entire land rolled along with Helga's hand, making Tewell feel the earth-shaking momentum. Layers of dense magic surged toward him like the land itself, washing over every cell in his body. Though he was still standing in the same place, surrounded by emptiness, he felt the suffocating weight pressing down on him. It was a real suffocation. Tewell felt his breath becoming harder and harder to sustain, unable to draw in any fresh air, even with his mouth wide open. He looked at Helga in shock. The magic in his body instinctively resisted this pressure, with the two forces constantly merging and absorbing into his body amid the compression. Now it was Helga's turn to be shocked. She never expected that such a young Tewell could resist her magic under these circumstances. This wasn't just any space. To be precise, it wasn't even a space. It was her constructed consciousness. Everything happening here was like her presentation of her understanding of magic to Tewell. In other words, Tewell's every sensation was under her control. After all, she was only a small part of consciousness, able to pull Tewell here relying on her home advantage. Nevertheless, Tewell still managed to gradually crush and absorb her magic into his body with his own magic and understanding of the sea of consciousness. Helga shook her head in resignation. I anticipated your uniqueness, but I never imagined you could achieve this level. It was only then that Tewell realized Helga's actions weren't hostile. Instead, she was helping him comprehend the four elements in this way. But he couldn't stop the magic surging out of him spontaneously. He could only watch as Helga's magic gradually diminished. So what now? Helga looked at him with a wry smile. I didn't expect your body's resistance to be so strong. Oh well. Before Tewell could respond, she pushed his chest again with her hand. Just like when he entered, his vision shifted, and he found himself lying in the real world. Except he didn't return to Helga's hut. The prickling sensation from the grass behind him told him he was back in the forbidden forest. Helga's voice faintly echoed in the air. You can take your time to comprehend from now on. I still need to take care of the rest of the forest with the little magic I have left. Really, who would have thought? Her complaining voice grew quieter and quieter until it was barely audible. At that moment, an adorable little rabbit appeared before Tewell. The rabbit clicked its tongue as if realizing the two-legged creature before it couldn't eat, then bounced away, dissatisfied. Tewell glanced at the rabbit's tail and chuckled lightly. It was said that a rabbit's tail wasn't as short as people imagined. If pulled out, it would defy common sense. In the past, he wouldn't have had the mood to consider such a boring question, but Tewell extended his right wrist. The curse still lingered, but now it was squeezed to just a little bit by the life force within him, waiting to be completely eradicated once he unraveled the secret of the badge. Lying on the ground in a star shape, Tewell's face broke into a wide smile. The warm sunlight bathed his face, shining on this 18-year-old young man. Incredibly dazzling. Lying on the grass, basking in the sunlight, and enjoying a moment of tranquility, Tewell had never felt his body so relaxed. Hey, where did you just go? The ring suddenly spoke. Realizing that his recent experiences were not so simple, even the ring he carried with him couldn't see his adventures as usual. Tewell teased, somewhere I could get rid of you. The ring panicked immediately. To be blunt, it had been with Tewell for more days than most people. In the past, Tewell's spirit was always tense, carrying with him a sense of urgency. Seeing him so relaxed now was a first. You can't do this, Tewell, the ring exclaimed anxiously. "I've been by your side for so many years, helping you learn dark magic. More importantly, you've been gradually awakening my soul, filling in the missing pieces. You can't let all that effort go to waste." Normally, a Horcrux, or even Voldemort's own soul, would be incomplete. But the ring absorbed Tewell's life force and was intentionally nurtured, making its soul much more complete than other Horcruxes. That's why the ring seemed a bit smarter, thanks entirely to Tewell's contribution. To some extent, the current ring was a combination of his life force and Voldemort's soul. "Don't worry. If I wanted to destroy you, I would have done it long ago," Tewell said, taking out the ring and playing with it in his hand. "I can't bear to let you be destroyed like that." He did have means to destroy a Horcrux, but as the ring said, it would be a waste of his life force to do it directly. Even a blade of grass had its purpose. The ring breathed a sigh of relief, but then noticed something on Tewell's right hand. Upon closer inspection, it noticed a small mark on his wrist. "Wait, did you really break the curse?" "Of course not. Just temporarily restore my life force," Tewell said, feeling his body. I won't be lacking for about 50 years. He had 2 curses on him, now just suppressed. They would only be fully resolved after meeting with Lady Ravenclaw. "Shall we still go steal the Philosopher's Stone?" "Of course we shall. After all this planning, we can't waste it. I'm quite thrifty, you know." Tewell paused. "And even if I don't need it, someone else will." "Who?" the ring asked casually. He was completely under Tewell's control now, unable to muster any other desires. "Of course it's you," Tewell said with a teasing smile in his eyes. If the ring's Voldemort's soul could be seen, it would surely be astonished by his widened eyes. "You're not lying to me, are you? Wizards don't deceive wizards." "Yeah, since you don't have much need for the Philosopher's Stone, what's the use of having it? Better to give it to me, right?" Sob. "My original form abandoned me in a dilapidated house, didn't care about me at all. You're the best to me. From the moment you touched the ring, I knew you were a good person." Receiving an unexpected good person card, Tewell knocked on the black stone on the ring. "Stop pretending. We agreed to make this act more convincing." The ring quieted down. Taking the opportunity, Tewell observed the resurrection stone on the ring. This angular black stone was engraved with the Peverell crest, the symbol of the Deathly Hallows, as deep as a black hole, absorbing any magic detection every time. To be honest, he didn't dare to study this stone casually. The contents inside and the divergence from the wizarding world were too much. At least until his research on souls reached a higher level, he wouldn't invest his time in the Philosopher's Stone. Speaking of which, the moment he realized it was the Philosopher's Stone, he unexpectedly thought, what would his state be if he recalled his soul at the moment of death? A superposition of being dead and not dead? Pondering for a moment, a massive shadow suddenly blocked the sunlight shining on him, and in front of him appeared a face with a full beard. "Professor Fawley?" Hagrid said, puzzled. "What are you doing here?" With no sunlight, Tewell stood up straightforwardly. Despite his towering height of 6 feet 3 inches, he still fell short compared to the half-giant. Speaking of which, this was their first formal meeting, so Hagrid introduced himself first. "You might not know me. I'm Rubeus Hagrid, the keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts." "How can I not know you? People like you are quite memorable," Tewell replied. Tewell then glanced around. This place was already on the edge of the Forbidden Forest, between the snow-covered ground and the dense forest. He hadn't expected Hagrid to be so considerate as to directly send him back here. 5 stars. Hagrid scratched his head with his free hand. He often heard such words, but he held most professors in high regard, even the unreliable ones like the previous defense against the dark arts professors, maintaining a student-like respect. "Although I don't know what you're doing here, it's better to appear less often in the Forbidden Forest recently." "Oh, has something happened in the Forbidden Forest?" Tewell speculated inwardly, especially with Hagrid holding a giant crossbow in one hand and a full quiver on his shoulder. "I'm not sure who it was, but there were quite a few disturbances in the Forbidden Forest last night. When I went to check, all I saw was a dark figure." Hagrid glanced worriedly toward the depths of the forest. I could sense clearly that the animals were restless. When I patrolled just now, I even found some dead acromantula bodies. They were killed swiftly. Though I know you're powerful, Professor. He paused, seeming to realize something, discreetly eyeing Tewell. Still, Professor, it's best to stay away from the Forbidden Forest as much as possible to avoid any unnecessary misunderstandings. His tone became sterner. Was he suspecting himself? Honestly, he didn't mean to offend. With Hagrid's behavior pattern, these small actions were more apparent than normal people's big actions. All right, Tewell nodded, looking in the direction where a little rabbit had just hopped away. He didn't want to disturb Quirrell's meal. Let him live well, so he could focus on his career. I probably won't come to the Forbidden Forest again. Please take good care of the little cutie here. But Hagrid obviously misunderstood Tewell's meaning of little cutie. After all, for him, dragons were the cutest creatures. Still, he smiled understandingly, waving his big hand cheerfully. That's my duty, just like teaching you. I knew it. A professor with such a good reputation couldn't possibly be plotting to steal the Philosopher's Stone. The students playing outside the castle felt incredibly fortunate. They were glad they hadn't spent their Sunday afternoon cooped up in the common room, dealing with the mountainous pile of boring assignments. Instead, they were out playing and wandering in the snow, because they encountered a Fawley professor who was friendlier than usual. It all started with a senior student who noticed Professor Fawley walking towards the castle with a spring in his step and boldly speculated that the professor must be in a good mood. Encouraged by her friends, she gathered her courage and asked the professor a question that had been bothering her for a long time. Professor, could you teach us some spellcasting techniques? Even if it's just a tutorial-style duel, she asked eagerly, hands clasped over her chest. Tewell paused, looking at the sudden group of young witches with confusion. But he was indeed in a good mood, so he stopped walking. Today is Sunday. Don't you plan to enjoy this leisurely time? Winter sun is quite rare, he remarked. Seeing that the professor didn't directly refuse, the girl became excited. Even the rarest sunlight can't compare to the rarity of your appearance, Professor. The professor had been absent except for classes recently, and he didn't show up at all yesterday. Her friends echoed boldly. Receiving your guidance in this wonderful leisure time is the most perfect thing, isn't it? Feeling the professor's attitude softening, the witches praised him as if words were free. Nearby students caught wind of something different happening and quickly gathered around, expressing their small expectations for the professor in a flurry of voices. Seeing their excited faces, Tewell smiled wryly. All right, but no dueling. I'm afraid of hurting you. The young witches cheered, their faces beaming with happiness. Yes, they were indeed very happy. Since Professor Fawley arrived at Hogwarts more than 3 months ago, they had been requesting for more than 3 months, enduring Professor Quirrell for more than 3 months. Now, they could finally attend a class with Professor Fawley. However, the first witch who asked the question was a bit unhappy. Damn, why couldn't the sky have a ceiling? In no time, news spread to every idle young witch that Professor Fawley would be tutoring senior students. However, to their disappointment, this class was limited to students in the 4th year and above. They were afraid that more students would come, and then Tewell would have to deal with 3 of himself. Wait, could there really be 3 of him? They were given 20 minutes to gather, and a clear space was cleared in the snow. After the preparations were done, despite some young witches still running over, Tewell formally began the class. With a wave of his wand, a larger golden membrane than before enveloped the students he designated, separating the class from the onlookers. Inside, there was laughter filled with pride and joy, while outside, there were only expressions of disappointment and frustration. I told you to hurry up, but you insisted on bringing several books. Ron complained to his 2 companions. Hermione threw her book bag in front of her impatiently. Even if we came earliest, the professor is teaching senior students. It has nothing to do with us. Then she pulled out several thick books that could be used as weapons from her bag. It's better to bring some relevant books. Maybe it'll be easier to understand the professor's class for seniors. The young witches around them lit up, but it was too late to rush back to the library now. but they had a mobile library with them. So, the lower grade students who didn't have the chance to attend class, as well as the senior students who arrived later, all gathered around Hermione and other top students. Outside the golden membrane, small circles formed. As for the students inside the class, they naturally surrounded Professor Fawley. He once again used the same spell for attendance, but this time with a small change. Each person's name still appeared above their head, but this time, the golden light converged into small ghosts, forming neat rows in the air. They resembled the little ghosts seen on Halloween. Now, everyone, stand under your own ghost and line up. Tewell's voice rang out loud as he pointed his wand at the base of his neck. With nearly 100 students present, they were initially puzzled how these colorful-haired little ghosts could recognize them. Soon, the little ghost provided an answer. "Mr. Prefect, please don't look around. Your ghost is standing above you." "Flint, I'm over here, you idiot!" a brash little ghost shouted, not very noticeable in the noisy environment, but the voice still reached Flint's mind. At this moment, Hermione outside the class exclaimed in surprise, "Do you all remember the professor's attendance spell?" She flipped through a book to the page about magical powers. "I've long suspected that the golden light above our heads isn't the professor's magic, but rather our own magic and—" Hermione frowned, hesitating whether to speak of this matter. Ron, being lost in thought, suddenly snapped back. "Keep going." Seeing the eager looks of the students around her, Hermione hesitantly continued, "It may also be related to our souls." "Does that mean the little ghosts are likely composed of our magic and souls, and are constantly connected to us?" A senior student immediately grasped the significance. "Does this mean Professor Fawley can freely extract souls and then kill us?" his friend asked in horror. "If the professor wanted to kill us, he wouldn't need such flashy magic," a young witch said softly. Tewell was very satisfied with the effect of this magic. Of course, he wouldn't use such magic to attack. Even with his current enhanced magical power, which was continuously increasing, using soul extraction as a means of attack was less effective than using the killing curse. In fact, this magic actually implied the concept of the dark mark, spreading his message through soul communication. Soon, under the guidance of the little ghosts, the students stood in neat rows, forming a 10 by 10 grid. "Very good." Tewell scanned their excited faces. "Because there are quite a few students, today's class will have the little ghosts assist you with some supplementary guidance. You are all senior students, and each has your own learning tasks. So today I won't be teaching content from the textbooks. In other words, today will be slightly beyond the syllabus." Suppressing a cheer, the students exchanged excited glances with their peers. Of course, they would be happy to have the professor teach them a regular class, but what they most looked forward to were those brilliant and extraordinary magic beyond the textbooks. So, before we start the class officially, I have to ask you a question. Do you remember the battle between Professor Fawley and Professor Flitwick? All the students, including those outside the class, shouted without hesitation, "We remember." This was the first duel they had seen in many years. Even if they didn't remember the details, they would remember the magnificent magic. "Do you still remember Professor Flitwick's dual magic curse?" The students immediately turned their eager eyes to Professor Fawley at the front. They seemed to have guessed what the professor was going to say next. "Today, I will teach you." Tewell paused, allowing the students' expectations to peak. Magic used against magic. Just as the words fell, the students could no longer contain their excitement. Standing in place and cheering loudly, their faces flushed red, whether from excitement or the cold weather. "However, forgive me for being blunt, but your current abilities are far from reaching that point," he continued. They felt as if they had been drenched by the falling snow. Their previously high spirits suddenly dampened. Fortunately, Tewell explained to them, "To achieve the level of Professor Fawley, you need to improve your understanding of magic spells, gestures, and the release of magical power. It's not something you can accomplish, at least not right now." Seeing some disappointment among the students, Tewell smiled and asked, "All right then, who among you can make magic pause? Like this." He waved his wand. "Fall unconscious." A red light shot out, but to the students' surprise, it didn't continue forward as expected. Instead, it stopped midair, resembling a small red thief. This is control over magic. You can think of it like the light orb emitted by the Lumos spell, with the only difference being that other spells would find it much harder to achieve this level. At least, Tewell himself could only achieve this level with some basic spells. I don't understand, Ron complained. Isn't the Lumos spell supposed to emit light from the tip of the wand? What do you mean by emitting a light orb? This time, they didn't need Hermione. Even Harry, who had been soaking up magical knowledge, could explain it to him. The light from the Lumos spell can detach from the tip of the wand and move to anywhere visible at the caster's will. Doesn't that mean it saves electricity for the light bulb? Ron exclaimed in surprise. The students in the classroom still didn't understand, but their confusion was different. They tried quietly to replicate the spell, but as expected, they failed. Even Percy, who had been dismantling spells lately, could only briefly halt the magic. In the end, they had to reluctantly accept the fact that their abilities were not enough for this task. Don't worry, Tewell encouraged them. I've long realized this, so I'll give you a little help. Waving his wand towards the surrounding snow, it seemed to boil, and nearly 100 fist-sized snowballs flew out, hovering precisely 2 feet above each student's head. Only then did they notice that each snowball had a small opening, revealing its hollow interior. Do you see? Tewell retrieved his wand, focusing the students' attention on him. You can understand the magic you emit as a balloon, with the magic effect being the outer layer and the magic power being the air inside. Now, I prepared a tougher outer layer for you, so you don't have to worry about making the magic pause. Next, you'll need to accurately release your magic into the snowball, filling it with an effective spell. Seeing the eager students, Tewell raised his voice to ensure they heard clearly. Remember, maintain a consistent and stable output of magic to prevent your spell from collapsing. Too little magic will cause it to dissipate due to insufficient power, while too much will burst the original spell. As for the type and amount of magical output, that's up to you. The students paid no heed to the professor's words. Upon hearing that the snowball could contain magic, they were eager to stuff their coolest and most flashy spells inside. They wanted to show the professor that they, as senior students, were not like those junior beans, only capable of playing with light balls. Compared to the excited students inside the golden membrane, the outside junior wizards could only watch the top students, hoping they would offer some insights to satisfy their curiosity. This time, Hermione couldn't say anything more. After all, she was only a first-year student, and even being able to recognize the spell was considered extremely excellent. However, Cedric was different. He had been taking private lessons with the professor for so long, quietly observing Percy's dismantling of spells, and combined with his already excellent knowledge base, he was prepared. He cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention, especially that of a certain student from Ravenclaw. Noticing this, he quickly averted his gaze and proudly said, "Take a close look at that golden membrane. It's actually a powerful armor charm." TCH, the students had done their research long ago. Who didn't know that this magic was the armor charm? Ignoring the disdainful looks from everyone, Cedric raised a finger and said mysteriously, "But there's something you definitely don't know." "What is it?" asked Autumn Zhang immediately. His face turned slightly red, embarrassed to show off anymore. In fact, the snowballs are also armor charms, but different professors seem to have applied variations to this armor charm, making it gentle yet resilient, and providing a barrier against magic without dissipating. No way. The armor charm is supposed to block magic. How could it not dissipate? Autumn Zhang exclaimed, mouth agape in surprise. Who knows? After attending the professor's classes for so long, my biggest impression is that he has played around with the armor charm. Cedric shrugged. I don't care about the armor charm. The key is we also have snow, but how can we play with it like them? Ron looked enviously at the students inside the golden membrane. They were already having a blast. Each of them emitted colorful lights towards the snowballs above their heads, completely ignoring Tewell's reminders about controlling magic and using proficient spells. However, despite their efforts, only a few students managed to accurately hit the hollow opening of the snowball. And even those who hit didn't do much damage. The specially reinforced armor charm couldn't be broken by their spells. As for the rest, their spells either missed or went wildly off course. Some students even accidentally hit their classmates in front of or beside them. You couldn't tell whether it was due to personal grudges or simply incompetence. After all, Tewell intentionally placed the snowballs above their heads. Watching them scramble around, the junior wizards outside couldn't help but mock them enviously. They want to play like that too. Tewell couldn't help but laugh and cry. After waking up several students who were accidentally injured, he had to wave his wand and inject his magic into the little ghosts on the students' heads. In an instant, the little ghosts seemed to come alive, their expressions much livelier, and their movements more human-like. Of course, their words became more authentic too. "Come on, Flint, you're a wizard, not a giant. The thing in your hand is obviously a wand used to cast magic, so why does it look like a stick in your hands? Percy, Professor Fawley wants me to tell you that you did the best in the whole class." Percy's face lit up, but then he heard the next sentence from the little ghost. "But you're also the farthest off topic. Didn't the professor tell you to use offensive spells? Can't you listen? Miss Penelope, I heard you're a candidate for Ravenclaw prefect." Penelope beside her was stunned. She thought the little ghost would say the same thing as the others, but why was it so friendly to her? "Yeah." She raised her small head proudly and smiled. "Professor Fawley already told me secretly." The little ghost shook its head and sighed. "Well, it seems like this year's Ravenclaw students aren't that great. Penelope, these imps aren't being controlled by Tewell. No, really they're not. He just infused them with magic, along with classroom standards, while also stimulating their connection to the main body. In fact, what the imps say is like a Horcrux, peering into the worries of the main body's heart and then exposing them. This serves to assist the students in their class. After all, harsh truths help one improve. Under the imps' unconventional critiques, the students gradually corrected their erroneous behaviors and followed the classroom standards. As senior students, hitting a stationary target like a troll was child's play for them. So, within half an hour, all the students could accurately hit the snowballs. But soon, they faced a new problem. The magic contained in the snowballs couldn't last long at all. Some held on for a while, only to have the magic dissipate instantly. Others hadn't even prepared, only to have them explode before their shocked eyes. "You're the most talented little wizard I've ever seen," praised the imp. It's nothing," the student replied, a bit proud yet bashful. "Absolutely. You can't manage even a single instance of consistent and stable magic. In the realm of incompetence, no one surpasses you." This time, it wasn't the imp's derision that could help the young wizards break through, for the task of maintaining magical output was something they had never tried before. For them, magic was about gathering a bunch of magic power and releasing it along with the spell and gesture. As for controlling it afterward, they never even considered it. Who behaves like a laser, continuously maintaining focus on the waves. So, Tewell had to step in. With a wave of his wand over their heads, he took control of the imp's jurisdiction and, in doing so, transmitted his words. "This technique is actually not unfamiliar to you," he said loudly. "It's similar to the levitation charm, maintaining continuous control. Only this time, what you're controlling is magic, so don't rush it. First, slowly understand magical output, then attempt to control it." After saying this, Tewell injected new teaching philosophies into the imps and then severed the connection, leaving the students to figure it out for themselves. It was careless. Communicating with over 100 souls consumed even more mental energy than he had imagined. Moreover, he hadn't rested much in the past few days. If he continued like this, he'd probably just lie down and sleep on the ground. And that's how advanced classes were. The key was for students to comprehend on their own. If they could learn everything in a normal class, it would have been written into the textbooks long ago. So, after Tewell's guidance ended, the students each turned red-faced, engaging in a contest with their own magical power. But to those surrounding them, it seemed more like farting, the kind where you can't quite let it out. What does this mean? Autumn turned to Cedric for help. Being the focus of attention, Cedric didn't know where to put his hands and feet. I don't know either. The professor didn't tell us about this. He stammered, his face as red as the people inside. Suddenly, an excited voice sounded on the edge of their small circle. I know. Everyone turned their heads and saw someone unexpected. Longbottom, Malfoy, who had been eavesdropping outside the circle, chuckled. I guess you know how to turn red like them. The crowd burst into laughter, teasing glances directed at Neville. His small round face instantly turned red, his previously excited expression replaced by shyness and timidity. He muttered a sorry and lowered his head. Ignore him, Neville. He's just a coward. Harry stood up and glared at Malfoy. Neville, although Harry's comforting words were a bit odd, he mustered up the courage, lowered his head, and whispered, The professor taught me this. He said it's a niche technique, but many advanced applications of magic require this continuous application of magical power, especially advanced transfiguration. Unlike our previous transfigurations, some powerful ones are constantly changing shape. To achieve this level, you need to continuously output magic. The more balanced, the higher the stability. Can you do this? Harry asked excitedly. Do I look like someone who can learn? Neville replied confidently. I've only learned to continuously output magic. In the professor's words, he can maintain a steadier magical output even by splashing water. As if hearing Neville's words, the imps immediately started a new round of encouragement behavior. But after hearing such words many times, the students had developed resistance. If your magic output could be as consistent as your single-minded brain, you'd have it in 3 seconds, the imp sneered. The young wizard just returned a mild smile. I'm sorry, my single-mindedness is broken. So let's learn something else, like your incessant chatter. This technique, as Neville said, is essential for becoming strong and not so easy to accomplish. So Tewell's demands on the students were not high. They only needed to maintain a spell in the snowball. Moreover, the ironclad charm in the snowball would also help balance their magic to some extent. Professor, did I succeed? Percy shouted in surprise. But because of his excitement, the magic in the snowball dissipated again. Tewell glanced at him. You did well. If this were in a formal class, I would give you extra points. But next, you need to ensure success and complete it as quickly and efficiently as possible. Not only Percy, but soon many top students and gifted students mastered this technique. They even carefully guided their classmates, especially when facing their crushes. They were almost meticulous, just short of holding hands to teach. The students' progress varied, but ultimately, they all mastered it within an hour before dinner. Tewell was very satisfied with this progress, or rather, he was somewhat surprised by the enthusiasm of the students guiding their classmates. Christmas was approaching, and who knows how many more couples will emerge. You did great. To be honest, if half of you could do it as I expected, I'd be very satisfied. Since that's the case, the next steps are much simpler. I'll apply the levitation charm to your snowballs. I don't need to say more about this, right? The students burst into triumphant laughter. But Tewell still needed to seal their snowballs, as the students couldn't yet cast 2 spells simultaneously. He controlled the nearby snowdrifts, sending out chunks of snowballs, and after each one was replenished, he let them land on the ground for the students to cast. Come on, this should be your first encounter with advanced magic applications, so please pay attention. Even using the levitation charm will give you a different feeling. But be careful. This snowball contains a spell inside, so control it carefully. The students were momentarily stunned. Isn't it just floating a snowball? Why does it seem so advanced? To be honest, they were a bit disappointed. What they were doing now didn't seem as cool as what the professor had described. But 1 minute later, their disappointment vanished. It wasn't just floating a snowball. After releasing the levitation charm, they sensed something was off. It was too light, as if it had no weight at all. Many accidentally lifted the snowball into the air. Not only the weight, but the feedback from the levitation charm was also different. It was as if 2 spells were stuck together, forming a new magic. This magic was created by themselves. They looked at Tewell in astonishment. feeling a sense of achievement that left them too excited to speak. Tewell returned them a smile. Back when he learned the fire cloak with his teacher's guidance, they were just like this. Speaking of his teacher, with Christmas vacation approaching, why not pay a visit? He was already looking forward to seeing his teacher's surprised expression on that perpetually proud and confident face. I hope you've all gained something from this class, Tewell said with a smile. But remember the offensive magic inside the snowball? So, for the next hour, we'll have a snowball fight. After Tewell finished speaking, amidst the students' puzzled looks, he separated them, dividing them into two groups, each comprised of students from different houses. It was a perfect opportunity to test out inter-house cooperation. In the middle, there was a waist-high fence, creating a pathway and dividing them. Stepping forward onto the path, Tewell addressed them. You'll be split into two teams, left and right, to play a snowball game. Each of your snowballs will be controlled by the levitation charm you cast, but don't worry about running out. When one snowball breaks, a new one will appear. The activity area is confined within the golden membrane and the fence. Your objective is to attack every person on the opposite side, while ensuring you're not hit yourself. Once hit, your snowball will completely shatter, meaning that person is eliminated and must retreat to the sidelines. By now, Tewell had crossed the pathway and arrived at the other side of the golden membrane, giving them a moment to digest the rules of the game. A reminder, though the attack spells in your snowballs have been weakened, the sensation isn't pleasant, so be sure to give it your all. Observing the spirited demeanor of the students on both sides, Tewell nodded approvingly. When he first arrived, he worried that Hogwarts students might be a bit pampered. But now, it seemed that courage in battle wasn't lacking in any grade. It's just that few had tapped into this aspect of themselves. Waving his wand towards the sky, a golden sphere flew towards the students' heads, stark against the gradually darkening sky. The battle ends when all opponents are eliminated or when dinner starts. The side with the most remaining members will be the victor and will receive the Christmas gift I prepared for you. So are you ready? The students eagerly shouted all sorts of sounds, creating quite a chaotic atmosphere. But they all conveyed the same message. We are ready. Excellent. Now listen to my command. The students gradually fell silent, their expressions more serious and solemn than ever before. 3. They took a deep breath, their wands held close to their chests. 2. Eager hands had already begun controlling the snowballs, eyes fixed on their targets. It was time for the professor's gift to be theirs. 1. The golden ball in the sky burst open, emitting a dazzling light, illuminating the area without being too glaring. At least, the students could clearly see their opponents. In that instant, dozens of snowballs flew like artillery shells towards the opposite side, hitting many students at once. But as the numbers dwindled, the students simultaneously noticed a problem. Why is it so hard to control? Percy watched his snowball miss again, while the imp on his head replenished him with another snowball. The levitation charm was such a simple spell. He had mastered it back in his first year, even making it his first silent spell. Yet once it flew across, the difficulty of control increased drastically, making him feel like a novice. Multifaceted magic isn't so easily learned, remarked Flint disdainfully, seeing Percy struggle. This is practically an advanced magic now. It's not something you fifth years can master, he sneered. Before Percy could retort, even the imp on his head couldn't stand it anymore. Are you proud as a sixth year who can't even cast a levitation charm properly? The imp viciously knocked Flint on the head. And you have a nerve to criticize others when you've been eliminated. It was only then that Flint realized he had been hit by a snowball. He stood frozen in place, feeling the chill throughout his body, but the imp's knock broke the ice. Across from him, Penelope, feeling sorry for the shivering Flint, waved and shouted, "Sorry, I was aiming for Percy." As time passed, more and more students gathered at the sidelines, loudly complaining to Tewell about the difficulty of the magic, and, "Professor, I was hit by a teammate's snowball. Can I have another chance? This is already good enough. You have no idea how miserable I am, standing in the front row, I got ambushed right away, hit by at least 5 snowballs. 3 for behind. Tewell had anticipated this situation. They had only been introduced to this magic this afternoon, and he was pleasantly surprised by their progress. With some more time to adapt, there would be fewer mishaps. Cough, he interrupted the students' complaints. This is also to remind you that on a real battlefield, if magic isn't cast accurately, it's likely to harm teammates. That's why large-scale wizard battles are either held in open areas or avoid using mass destruction magic. Because most magic doesn't have friend or foe recognition. To make magic have friend or foe recognition is simple. Just mix in a bit of soul-based magic. Professor, will we have classes like this again? A cautious young witch asked. As soon as this question was asked, the scene instantly quieted down, with everyone eagerly awaiting Tewell's response. Their initial anticipation for Professor Quirrell's classes stemmed solely from how terrible Professor Quirrell was. They just wanted a normal professor to teach them. But after experiencing such an extraordinary class, they all had the same thought. Professor, please get rid of Professor Quirrell. However, Tewell shook his head. This was decided before the start of the school year. Your classes will be taught by Professor Quirrell. Technically, today already violates school regulations. Seeing the disappointed looks on the students' faces, and even a few young witches quietly sobbing, was their acting skills this good already? He couldn't help but laugh and compromise. Don't worry, we'll reserve this area, and you can have snowball fights here any time before the end of the Christmas holiday. Those few young witches instantly perked up, their smiles returning, no trace of their previous tears. Will there be those specially made snowballs? Of course, the imps will distribute snowballs to you then, but be aware that they consume a lot of magical energy, so take care of yourselves. The conversation immediately shifted to the imps, with the students having a love-hate relationship with these little creatures. Professor, will this imp stay on top of my head all the time? Yeah, they're really cute. Are these imps the Christmas gifts? I really want one. If only they could speak a little less directly. With that said, the young wizards fell silent, their expressions awkward. The imps only appear when you enter this area, and their presence consumes a significant amount of your magic, so it's not suitable for them to be around constantly. In reality, it wasn't just magical energy being consumed, but also their mental and physical stamina. Tewell had already seen several young wizards yawning. This afternoon was like pulling an all-nighter for them, so he didn't dare to continue for too long. Otherwise, the infirmary would be overwhelmed with exhausted students. Just then, cheers erupted from the snowball battlefield. The battle had officially ended. Tewell looked over. There were few students left inside, mostly 6th and 7th years, with Percy, a 5th year, standing out prominently. But he raised his head proudly. He alone hit several students higher in years and dodged around 10 snowballs. He was undoubtedly the hero of their victory. Waving his wand, the imps above the students' heads turned back in a golden light, flying towards the parchment in his hand, forming 2 lists. Excellent. I've recorded your names. Just wait for your Christmas gifts. He looked towards the other side. To those who didn't succeed, don't be discouraged. Ponder over what happened today. It will benefit all of you. Now, this class is dismissed. Students, there is still some time before dinner, but in the winter nights of England, darkness always fell particularly early. Before 5 o'clock, the road ahead was already indistinguishable without lights. So, Tewell cast a guiding fluorescent charm, urging the reluctant students to make their way back to the castle. Meanwhile, he made some minor alterations to the area, having its size and arranging some imp magic. After completing all this, he leisurely made his way back to the brightly lit castle. However, upon entering the castle gates, he encountered an unexpected individual, or rather, someone who was intentionally waiting for him. Well, isn't this our beloved Professor Fawley? Snape stood sideways by the dim gate, half of his body buried in the shadows, revealing only a face with a smirk on the corner of his mouth and those cold eyes. Tewell was taken aback by the sudden and eerie voice. He even reached for his wand. Beloved might be an overstatement, but at least Professor Snape, unlike you, is kept busy here," he replied, reinserting his wand into his robe pocket. He then straightened his robes and smiled at Snape. Snape sneered, not bothered by Tewell's sarcasm. "I'm curious, Professor Fawley. Although you only teach 3 grades, why have you been so busy? You disappeared since yesterday morning until now." His mouth still held a smile, but his eyes bore a hint of ruthlessness. It seemed that if Tewell's answer didn't satisfy him, he would draw his wand the next moment. Tewell glanced unexpectedly at Snape, not expecting to be under Snape's suspicion as well. Was it because of Quirrell's stupidity? Unlike potions class, defense against the dark arts always requires preparation of some animals for teaching purposes. So I went to the Forbidden Forest to search. Any problems? Snape scanned Tewell from head to toe, finally fixing his gaze on his empty hands. "And the animals?" "Dead," Tewell replied nonchalantly, but under the torchlight, it seemed somewhat eerie. Snape's smile vanished instantly, his eyes narrowed slightly. He took a small step forward into the light, but also blocked the light from shining on Tewell's face. "I think you should know your own identity. Don't do anything suspicious," he warned. "Thanks for the reminder. I think compared to Professor Snape, I'm not that outrageous, am I?" His eyes were no longer cold, but playful. Then, he leaned down to whisper, "I don't know what you're up to, and I don't care about your collusion with Quirrell. But once I find out you have ulterior motives, I won't mind adding some Veritaserum to your dinner." "Well, I also want to taste Veritaserum. But be careful. I'm afraid I might say something that students can't handle. Like about you and the Dark Lord." Snape's gaze instantly hardened. With Dumbledore's guarantee, he was not afraid of the past being exposed. But his behavior at the school would certainly be restricted. If it disrupted the tasks he must carry out, it would be unacceptable. So, he glared fiercely at Tewell, his voice raised slightly. "I don't care what you know, if you dare to defy." But at that moment, his face turned to the corner of the corridor. "Who's there?" In less than a second, 3 tiny figures emerged from the corner. Harry hesitated. "Professors, we just finished dinner, so we came over here, digestion." Ron answered loudly, nodding confidently, and even patted his round little belly, as if to add credibility to his words. Hermione couldn't stand it anymore. She pulled on the back of his shirt. "Stop it. Snape's eyes can kill you. If no one has taught you etiquette, you can go ask the giant troll from Halloween. He has a lot to teach you," Snape said ominously. -5 points each. He gave Tewell one last glance before striding away in anger. Harry and his friends breathed a sigh of relief. They were used to losing points, although this time it was a bit much, but 15 points didn't make much of a difference. 3 sets of exam papers. Tewell smiled at them suddenly. 3 for each of you. Finish them before the end of next week, or your Christmas gift will be a whole set of exam papers, enough to last you until the end of the school year. Not only Snape, but Tewell himself had been careless. Despite feeling physically tired, the increase in his power this time had made him a little too self-satisfied. As someone who had high standards for himself, he couldn't allow such a low-level mistake. He handed out the 9 exam papers to them and then left. He was still thinking about dinner, but now he needed to sleep first. However, this left Harry and his friends with a grim expression. Hermione glanced through the papers. The content wasn't as simple, with many essay questions. She didn't mind. She even looked forward to receiving the professor's Christmas gift. But Harry and Ron couldn't bear it. 3 sets of papers, isn't that too much? Harry complained as soon as Tewell left. Ron sighed, "Let it go. We can each do 1 set." After seeing Professor Fawley's look just now, I didn't dare to plead for leniency. This is the first time I've heard of doing papers after class. The professor won't leave any loopholes for us. Hermione shook her head, showing them the questions on the papers. And she cautiously glanced in the direction the professor had left. This is also the first time I've seen the professor so angry. Are those 2 discussing something important here? Of course, Ron exclaimed angrily. Snape must have pressured the professor to steal something, and then the professor disappeared all day. Harry nodded in agreement. Exactly. Snape even reminded the professor to watch his identity. Maybe Snape has some leverage on him, and is forcing him. Hermione looked at her two indignant friends with a mix of belief and doubt. The professor's attitude just now didn't seem like he was being threatened. How could these two come up with so many ideas? But she didn't have a more rational explanation, so she could only say ambiguously, "Our most important task now is to find out who Nicholas Flamel is, and also what's wrong with Professor Fawley." Ron emphasized solemnly. "Fine, if possible, also investigate what leverage Snape has on the professor," Hermione said helplessly, "and then help the professor get rid of it." "Sure,"